Fantastic. So, welcome everybody to session 4 of 4 for Responsible Raw Materials 2025. Thank you very, very much for coming back for our last session. This conference has been absolutely fantastic. It's been all about collaboration. And for those of you who've been dialing in to all of our sessions, you'll have seen a wonderful, diverse array of speakers who have been coming to us from all around the world. By the time we finish this session here today, we will have heard from speakers from at least 15 different countries based in everywhere from Malaysia and Australia through to Tanzania and Namibia, up into many different European countries, including Ireland. And then there are lots of us here dialing in from different parts of the UK. And of course, we've had some wonderful individuals from the Americas, including Colombia, the US, and Canada as well. So it's been a really fantastic conference, as always, and we've got a great lineup for you in this last session. As per usual, just to give you a brief overview of where you can find all of the fantastic materials from Responsible Raw Materials, which is, of course, a not-for-profit that is run by volunteers, all of whom just care passionately about where raw materials come from and how we keep them in circulation. Because, of course, if there's one thing we ain't making any more of, it is, of course, our wonderful planet. A little bit of dust does land on our planet every year, but not really enough to make a meaningful difference. So therefore, we have to live with what we've got and make the most of all of that fantastic material that we can play with and try and make our lives a little bit better and look after everything round about us as well. So with regards to that, as per usual, our Responsible Raw Materials website can be found at responsiblerawmaterials.com. So I shall try and share that screen with you at the moment. Hopefully you can all see that. Please feel free to go and check it out and go exploring with regards to what you might find within it. It includes things like the 2025 conference. And if you want to find out more about our wonderful speakers for today, go all the way down to the bottom. Click on Thursday, the 1st of May, PM or the afternoon session, and you will be able to find little links to many of our wonderful speakers here. So we've got some biographies, so for some of them, we've got nice little abstracts, etc. as well. So feel free to go and check out some of our wonderful speakers. You can also go back in time as well. Yes, we provide the art of time travel, so you can go back in time and you can check out some of those talks that we've had earlier on this week. And you think, oh, I want to go and find out, what did Zach talk about on Tuesday morning? Well, if you go and click on Learn More, that will take you to Zach's page. And you can see that the team behind the scenes, that yes, they are available for hire, everybody. They have managed to edit Zach's video already. So you can just click play on that and that will show you Zach's video. And further down, you can see a little bit of his biography and his abstract. If you decide you've had enough of Zach, or you want to go and find some more talks from Responsible Raw Materials over the year, or over the years that we've been running, just go into talks, and here you will find well over 300 different talks that have been loaded, because yes, we've been doing this since 2020, haven't we, Rose? I'm going to bring Rose into the conversation now, because Rose, maybe you tell the story of where all of this came from, because I've done it the last few times. Do you want to do it this time, even though you've got COVID?
Yeah, sure. Everyone excuse my voice. I promise I don't usually sound so nasally. Um, I think as Sarah would say, back in the depths of 2020, I was actually meant to start an internship with Sarah at the time. And then something happened in the March time, and an internship just suddenly wasn't a very sensible thing to be trying to do, especially with going to London. And so we pivoted and we ran the first Responsible Materials Conference in 2020. And I think everyone was shocked at what a success it was. I think honestly, it was a great time to start something like this, because I think people needed something to rally around, and it brought together a really, really unique mix of people who perhaps wouldn't always have the time and space and inclination, I guess, to come together. And it was really great. And since then, I'm the longest standing intern ever, I think, still here. So if anyone wants to rescue me, then I'm in Dudley. I'm joking. I'm very much joking. But yeah, responsible materials has been great and really, really grown. So over the years, we've run some fantastic events. So we've ran conferences specifically on things like the resource reserve reporting codes and how to bring ESG into those. That was probably one of my favourite events actually that we've done. It was really interesting. We had people from China and Mongolia and South Africa and just really unique perspectives. So that's worth a look if you've never been there. Um, but yeah, every year around this time we have run different conferences. So 2021, we ran a conference on the ESG toolbox, which was fantastic, and that infographic I've seen in many presentations since. In 2022, we ran a conference on mining all raw materials as a mean to unlock the just transition. So really, how can we um, not only extract the raw materials, but actually use the processes of doing so to really share equity and benefit the world around us. Um, then in 2023, we spoke about trust, which actually had a lot of similar themes, I think, to some of the themes that have been coming out this year on collaboration. Um, probably because effective collaboration probably does require at least an element of trust. But that was a really enjoyable conference because we really engaged even broader than usual, bringing together lots of people who think about trust in different sectors and different areas. And then last year, I was a little bit busy, to be honest with you all, because I had just brought a little human into the world. And so I tapped out and didn't organise this conference in the way that I'd organised or helped organised all the others. And I just got to watch, which was beautiful. Um, uh, but the team did a fantastic job, and we went back to the beautiful infographics and we spoke about how different choices that can get made can again influence um the sector and how we all have a role to play within that and how we can all make better informed decisions. So this year we've kind of revisited um the themes of collaboration. And actually, the things that have been coming out have really highlighted, I think, how responsible raw materials was a great initiative 5 years ago when we founded it, and still is relevant because there's still a lot of work that can be done with regards to how we can collaborate within the sector.
Awesome. Thank you very much for that, Rose. That was a beautiful summary, and leads us nicely into, okay, so what have we been talking about over the last few days? Well, to get this in more detail, of course, scroll down to the bottom and you can see all of our lovely speakers that we have down here. But I'm going to stop sharing so that we can see your lovely speakers for the session that we have this afternoon, and to just tee us up in terms of what we've been hearing and learning. So in session one, we discovered that if you're a geoscientist, you love talking about data, basically. So all those natural scientists, they all focus in on data and how to get better at sharing it, using it, piling it all together, and maybe being a little bit humble about the fact that just because you weren't the one that collected that data, somebody else's data might still be useful for you. But how can you bring all of that together? In terms of actually forming collaboration, so Erica from the United Nations, that was very closely involved in the drafting of the Critical Raw Materials Act in Europe, she brought in some great learnings, which were mostly around listen. And in fact, a lot of people were saying, shut up and listen, because that's really important when you're collaborating. But more than that as well is if you can build that trust and understanding, or basically know what everybody else brings to that table, that then really helps with the collaboration. So in a way, go and do your homework on everybody else who's sitting around that table, because then it helps you actually engage with them better and make sure that everybody is drawn into that conversation and into that dialogue. Zach shared with us some learnings from the Courageous Conversations initiative that he's been running in Southern Africa, and that within that some great quotes there. So get everybody walking in the same direction, but on their own paths. So I think that that sort of autonomy that everybody can have, and everybody brings their own way of doing things to the table, is really excellent. But how do you get people sort of pointed in the same direction and have that superordinate goal? So that shared goal or that shared thing that people believe in, but then how we get there, actually giving people that freedom to navigate their own path. And of course, trust being something that you have to give or gift as a whole. And then also coming through from the first session was from Claire, who was speaking to us from Manila. So she reminded us that, of course, there is that saying, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. But it doesn't necessarily happen quickly. So this can be something that's quite tricky with regards to that. In session 2, again, another fantastic array of speakers that we had there, including everybody from Johannes, who is a very well-regarded facilitator. And actually, some of his tips and techniques were coming through again this morning. And he actually came at things from a kind of a warning perspective. So he said, if you have no common vision, then that can cause confusion. If you have isolated sets of knowledge, then that can cause frustration. And then if you have misaligned incentives, then that can cause or result in resistance. So I thought that was really interesting coming at it from the negative perspective. I very naturally am quite an optimistic, positive person, but I thought it was actually quite nice turning it around and seeing it from the other side of the coin there as well. And through that second session, there was quite a big discussion around how do you value the people who are the connectors or the bridges between different disciplines. Sometimes we really celebrate those people who are those subject matter experts in something very, very specific. But how do we value and rate and reward those people who actually connect everything together? And that also came through this morning when we were talking about, say, within universities, often the academics are the ones that are held on a pedestal and they're the superstars. But actually, universities don't work without all of the professional services and the people who are actually making those projects run, etc., often behind the scenes as well. So how do we make sure that we value all of those different people that it takes to form that collaboration? And just to finish off on that second session back on Tuesday, Chris Tucker, who was speaking to us from a project in British Columbia, really spoke about how it takes a great deal of humility and also respect for the people that you are working with, be it within your own team or with those other teams that you are working with broadly as well. In terms of key areas that we focused in on this morning, so in the session that we had earlier on today, well, we kicked off with the most amazing fireside chat with Anna, who was dialing in from Tanzania. And Anna, continues to have the most amazing career, currently working with the BBC in Africa. And what she was talking about there was, how do you almost create or have that courage to say, well, hang on a second, just because traditionally we've always done things in one particular way, can we do things in another way? And so it's well worth going back and taking a look at her presentation or her conversation. And in terms of that diversity of views, no one view is more important than others. So how do we again have that humility of bringing in all of those different views from different people, and have that build that momentum of courage? So it just takes one person to show everybody else that you can do things differently. So how do we try and encourage that? And in the world of social media, etc., working out, okay, you might stand up and say something. Do you run the risk of being cancelled or something like that? Well, yes. But actually, you don't need to do things in a big splashy way on social media. You can start off small with your family and friends. And so there are lots of different ways to create those ripples across different sectors of society and create that change. We then have had Maeve, who dialed in from Ireland, and Maeve described the case study of the AGI, which brings together 50 different member societies from across that world of geosciences to say, okay, what's that voice that geosciences really speaks for as a whole? And especially Maeve told the story of putting together the guidelines for the ethical code of conduct, effectively, or professional conduct. And there were some really good learnings in there, especially the first one that comes out in this one pager that they produced was be honest. And I mean, it almost feels weird that we have to say it. But as Maeve said this morning, if you start from there, then everything else becomes really, really easy. And I guess I interpret that as being honest with others as well as yourself, in terms of what you're doing with this. And also when you're pulling together people to create those collaborations, it's that leading from the middle. And having that humility to lead as well, and make sure that egos don't get out of hand. So how do you deal with all of that? We then went to Australia and Sujatha, who gave us insight into how do you pull together transdisciplinary groups, so where you've got industry and academia working together, and this being especially important when you're undertaking work in the world of raw materials, and being able to encourage social sciences and natural sciences to work together. And she cited some fantastic statistics, such as 54% of the energy transition materials are on or near indigenous land, 30% of the land has some form of decision making that is given to indigenous people. I say given to, that sounded very condescending, but it's led by indigenous people. And in Australia, for example, 80% of that land has some form of native title attached to it. So what does this mean? It means, hang on a second, we need to work out what Indigenous, First Nations, native title holders actually really think and feel, and what do they expect before we maybe go in there with different forms of technology, etc. And actually, even better than that, how do we collaborate to develop those different forms of science and technology in the first place? So different ways of coming at those particular aspects. Then Estelle joined us, and Estelle had a fantastic framework for cooperation. And so what does that methodology really look like as you build the consensus, as you build the collaboration between different groups? We then heard from Helen, who works for Callison. There we go. I've just merged their names together, Rose. So Helen spoke to us not about raw materials, but all about collaboration. And as a community, as a company that works just outside Manchester, what do you value as a company, but where do you align with the local community? And when your values align, then that change has roots, because the change is being led by the community rather than you going in and forcing some sort of change, which doesn't then really last the time that it requires. We then heard from Oliver Richards, who's holding the pen on the UK critical minerals strategy, and he's done a great job of putting together all kinds of different people so that we can better understand what needs to go into that government level strategy. And he's done an amazing job of being very patient with lots of people, all of whom think they have the answer in terms of how the UK government should spend the money that it doesn't have. And then finally, we heard from the amazing Kherchi, who is one of the world's most amazing environmental psychologists. I work very, very closely with Kherchi. So I come from that natural sciences background. Kherchi comes from that social sciences background. And wow, she has taught me a lot. And especially what or how social science experts generally approach a problem, or a particular area where change, for example, may provide opportunity to other people in that area, and actually how social scientists and natural scientists will come at this differently and probably wind one another up inadvertently if you don't take the time to understand how different people come at the same problem. So with regards to today, just before we launch into our first session, our wonderful speakers, as you can see from our website. So we're going to start off with a little panel session with Darren and Chris. We'll introduce them in a second. We're then going to hop over to Ireland to Owen and hear about the world of aggregates and collaboration. Joel is then going to give us an update from the world of geology for global development or geosciences for global development, talking about effective collaboration in policy development, which is going to be absolutely great, building on some of those earlier presentations we've had in the week, where they're going to hear from Helen and the world of agriculture, because it's not all about the rocks. Actually, we need to grow stuff as well. And so what does that world of agriculture bring and what can we learn from that? Then across to Madhu. And Madhu, I know that you've been loitering in the background, listening in to the full conference. So it's going to be really interesting to hear what you bring to the table. And then finally, we're going to welcome both Priscilla and Monica, who are the two amazing people behind the brand new podcast, Mining Dialogues. And I know that we've been promoting it all week. Well, now you get to meet two of the architects who sit behind it, which is going to be fantastic. So with that, I'm going to welcome to the stage the fantastic Darren Lamb and the awesome Chris Stockey. I'm going to hit record so that we can get this little panel session or this fireside chat or whatever we want to call it rolling. We'll start off by actually inviting you to introduce yourself. So who are you? And why do you think you are here in this conversation? So, Darren, how about we start with yourself and then we'll go to Chris.
Thank you very much, Sarah. My name is Darren Lamb. I am traditionally an executive producer who has moved into the sustainability space. I've been working very closely with Sarah, Chris, and the team on the documentary that launched today. Why I'm here, I think, is to share my experience and my knowledge of the last, I think, 4 or 5 months, I think it is now, of putting this project together and some learnings from that. And yeah, it's the journey that's taken, really.
Awesome. Thank you very, very much, Darren. Absolutely. Chris, how about yourself? Who are you and why are you here?
Thanks, Sarah. Hi, everyone. I'm Chris Stockey. I am the climate change and nature lead at Setala, but also wear the hat of Vector project manager. So that is the project that you've seen the documentary for being circulated and was released today. But before that, back in my days of being an academic and doing my PhD, which was in fossils, although sometimes we do say it was in geosciences, I was also involved in a major blue chip documentary through that, and I've always been interested in science communication. So here to share my perspectives on collaborating effectively to make sure that science doesn't get stuck in an academic sphere and makes its way out to different stakeholders to have that impact.
Awesome. Thank you, Chris. So Darren, having waltzed into this world of making our documentary. So, I mean, we first started talking about this, what, 5 months ago, 6 months ago, something like that.
Christmas, Boxing Day. I think it might have actually been Boxing Day or the day after.
So
Yeah.
there we go. Okay, so let's call it 5.5 months.
Yeah.
Let's go with that in terms of the documentary that was released at 1 o'clock this afternoon. So that was 1 o'clock on the 1st of May. That seemed a bit auspicious. In terms of coming into the creation of this documentary, this was something where if it had been left up to, say, Chris and myself, so two scientists, I think we would have had a very different product. And instead, what you brought to the table was that amazing world of TV and film. Do you want to just describe what it was like reaching out to your world, and that introduction that was made to the world of science and research?
Yeah, I think it was an amazing opportunity, first and foremost. I hadn't experienced a project like this exactly before, as in a science communication piece, but stylized and created for a popular, wider audience, really. So it was really interesting. The way I sort of went about it was to sort of get a bit of an idea of the different kind of styles and the different kind of teams that could potentially put this together with us. So I went down a sort of classic commercials and content route. I went down a big sort of corporate broadcast PR type route, and I also went down a more traditional factor entertainment TV route. And that's really, as we know, that's where we sort of felt more comfortable. I think the style that was we discussed with that particular team resonated with the audience that we wanted to reach, and it was a great mechanic really for translating quite complex science data into something that's quite palatable to a wider audience, not only on screen but on the day of the shoot as well, at the event. So I think we made the right choice there.
And just with that, just to, I guess, it kind of explain it in more detail. So this was a case where we thought, okay, we have this concept, and the concept was, let's invite a viewer to come and take part in a social science study where we're asking 100 volunteers what they think about different aspects of raw materials. And so it was a case of how do you welcome that viewer into a study? And I think, as you were describing there, we took a look at a variety of different methods of doing or styles of doing it. We landed up with the kind of the TV style, so something that you might find on the BBC or Channel 4 or something like that. But we did look at some other styles as well, like a slightly more artsy
We did.
worlds.
Yeah.
You want to describe that in a bit more
Yeah,
detail?
to be honest, I think you could have done it in so many different exciting, interesting ways. It does come down to the audience, I think, that we wanted to reach. That was a big key thing. For example, we could have done the sort of high-end, really glossy, sort of commercial looking piece. It could have been a big white psych studio, and quite a, sort of a bare set. The other way we were looking at was building a really complicated set in a warehouse and things like that. And I think when the opportunity to come up to work with the Natural History Museum and use the incredible space of the Hints Hall, it just felt right. And I think that's where it sort of landed. Like, yes, this is where it needs to be. It's got the right context, it's got popularity, people know where it is, they understand it. And I think that was one of the key things for me when looking at the different options about why we should do it in such a style, in such a way.
And just with that as well, Darren, and before I move on to Chris, in terms of working out where does somebody's suggestion or creative input end and then the space for somebody else's to come in on that start? I think that was really interesting because it was a case where it was almost the scientists came up with the idea and then went, okay, come on, creative people, what do you
Yeah.
reckon? But it was really interesting in terms of that kind of fuzzy zone in the middle where everyone was being very polite with one another,
Yes.
not wanting to step on one another's toes. So especially if we go all the way back to the beginning of just the style. So what style did we want for the
Yeah.
documentary? Do you have any comments on, I guess, people being polite with one another?
I think I think the best thing from a collaboration point of view is mutual respect and understanding of different worlds meeting. My background, I've done sort of 20 odd years in TV and commercials, and every project's different. You're privileged. One of the reasons I do what I do is that you're incredibly privileged to step into a world you'd never have access to or be involved with and spend maybe a couple of weeks or a couple of months, or in this case, 5 months in that world, understanding it, trying to make sense of it, and then produce something that will hopefully resonate with viewers and do the job it's designed to do. So I think it's coming in early is really important. I think everyone understanding each other's skill sets and knowledge. And you're absolutely right. It's important to be polite. However, there has to be a hierarchy in decision makers. Otherwise, we were working to a very tight deadline of about 5 or 6 weeks, I think it was in the end, something like that. So decisions had to be made, and I think, it worked really well, and the best decisions were made ultimately, for the best of the documentary, really. Yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you, Darren. Chris, I know that you've been obviously deeply involved in the documentary itself, but before that, once upon a time, you were one of the scientific advisors on a very large, high-profile production. Do you want to talk about what it was like being that science advisor into that world of creatives?
Yeah, absolutely. So I was, as Sarah has just explained, an advisor on a major documentary called Life on Our Planet. It's a Netflix series. It was at the time, it may still be, I'm not sure, the largest spend on a TV series ever for a documentary. It was 14.2 million. I was meant to, so this was my version of Rose's internship. I went and worked on that and spent another 2 months advising them. I'd never stepped foot in that world before, so I came at it from an academic perspective, and a month turned into accidentally being in charge of assets worth in excess of £100,000, and making the shots as to what they should look like. It was absolutely terrifying, but I think actually Darren just highlighted, that immediate input and respect for it and listening to those different perspectives. And that was really key in trying to have, what should a woolly mammoth's hair look like? Trying to have quite a detailed scientific conversation about that, but within the boundaries of a documentary. So it's not, is it 100% perfect? It's, does it tell the story accurately enough for somebody to buy into this narrative and journey with, integrity? But also then there being a hierarchy of communication. So I never spoke to the SFX team that produced the assets that I was advising on, despite that, me being the person accountable for them in some respects. That went through, a multitude of different teams talking to each other. So kind of a scaled up version, but with the same principles underlying.
And with that then, Chris, so then taking that experience and coming into the world of this documentary that we were making, just need to add, to make this very clear, we did not spend 14.2 million on the 28-minute documentary that you can watch for free on YouTube at this precise second in time. Our budget was slightly lower than that. But Chris, was there anything that I guess surprised you or delighted you in terms of the collaboration that we had with Big Circus, who are the filmmakers that we brought in to work with us on this?
I think what surprised me actually is that everything worked as you would like it to and should be in many ways. There was respect for understanding what the end goal was, which is to take an academic concept or a detailed scientific construct and bring it down to what's pertinent and what's necessary. And I think that's where a lot of the communication of science fails, is that we get stuck in the details. We know that there's a difference between these two words, and frankly, they're normally what you've built your career on, is the difference between those two words. So letting go of the difference of those two words in the production of documentaries is so hard. But just that respect and desire to learn from one another. And I think that was, I wish it wasn't unique about the team that was assembled on this documentary, but I think that it can be unique. We had the joy of working with a great production company, and we had a great team on our end working on it, all of whom who wanted to enter that arena of collaboration and trust rather than say it's my way or the highway. I've had experiences with other production companies where that is not the case. I've had experience with other academic groups where that is not the case. So surprisingly, it just worked seamlessly as you would want it to.
Well, I'm glad that's what it looked like to you, Chris. That's of course it was a great thing. Darren, from your perspective though, because you were often that bridge between the world of science and then the world of TV, etc. What were some of your big frustrations?
Oh, okay. I wasn't expecting that one.
You can twist the question. It's
Yeah,
okay.
that's fine. I I think for me, as I said before, you have to adapt very quickly into the situation you're placed in as a producer and a storyteller. Um, I think from a frustration point of view, you learn not to really have them unless it's people sort of, dropping out or something on the night. My biggest fear, honestly, was we had 100 people coming into the space on the evening for the filming. We had 4 or 5 hours to actually do it. Are they going to turn up? That's the thing. Are they actually going to be there? That was a really big thing for me. So that wasn't a frustration. It was probably the biggest concern. But I think the other thing is to slightly be aware of is that TV and production usually works incredibly fast. It's very high paced. It's very intense. It works outside of normal hours quite a lot. So I think sometimes when, some of the science was, took a bit longer because obviously you wanted to get it accurate, you wanted to make sure it was robust, all the things that absolutely has to happen from a science perspective. That takes a bit of realignment to make sure that everyone's going at the same pace and in the same direction, I think. But frustrations, I think we incredibly lucked out on the team is a big thing as well. I think that it was a great team with lovely people.
Oh, we're all being very polite, aren't we? No, it
Yeah.
was. It was. I think as well, though, if we were to do this again,
Yeah.
So let's say that we go back in time. It is Boxing Day
I've got
2024.
my hat on, Christmas hat. Yeah.
You've got your Christmas hat on, you're feeling, kind of, you've had all that lovely food and everything, all of that kind of stuff. And we were about to do this again. I think from a personal perspective,
Mm.
I probably do more homework in terms of what is the process flow that a production company actually needs to follow in terms of making the documentary.
Yep.
I would probably have it clear in my head in terms of what were those really key crunch points
Yep.
and everything that was needed for it.
Yeah.
And then be able to work backwards again into that science to say, oh, but hang on a second, that date's just not going to work because we're going to need a number of weeks to
Yeah.
crunch the data or to do X, Y, Z. So I
100%.
think that kind of, sort of key learnings is almost before we'd even started is really get that kind
Yeah.
of timeline or that process a bit tighter. Is that fair, do you think?
Yeah, I think to build on that point, I think looking back in hindsight, what would have, I think, really helped, and it would help every future production, I think, a line like this, is for almost like science training for producers in the first week. It's a day, a mutual day of understanding each other, understanding the way we all work. So it'll be a day spent together. It'll be workshops or briefing for the scientists to share what the entirety of the project, its milestones, the schedules, all those kind of things exactly. And again, from the other side, for producers to, again, as you say, mark the points that they would need, so it all aligns to go into smoothly. I think that was a big key learning for me. Yeah,
Yeah, I think that kind of, in a way, that sort of science training for the producers, but then also production training for
yeah,
the scientists. So that kind of that two-way learning and almost leaning into some of the discussions we had a couple of days ago with Erica, where she was saying something that worked really nicely when they were writing the Critical Raw Materials Act was that everybody knew what one another were bringing to the table. So that allowed them to work much, much faster. And I think yeah, that's certainly something that we've learned now. I don't think we know everything about one another, but we've learned a lot more.
we have.
Um, so I guess with this, in terms of that science communication, so Chris, maybe coming across to yourself, the way in which we've tried to get the documentary to share that story is instead of telling people science. So this is then going with that collaboration almost with the viewer or the person who's watching the documentary. The traditional way of doing it is to tell people. And I think this is, again, big kudos to Hershey, who's one of the architects behind all of this, is instead of telling somebody something, actually encourage people to critically think about something. And so therefore they come to the conclusions themselves. This is quite a big twist on how science communication usually works. Do you have any thoughts or feelings on that?
Yeah, I think it's a big twist. It's a change, and yet it so shouldn't be. It's almost like I think there's trying to think about quite how to phrase it, but the education system and the way we communicate has become very factoid based or prescription based for the last 3 decades. And it's now coming back to learning critical thinking skills and basically allowing people to be inquisitive. Because if you tell everyone a bunch of facts really quickly, you don't want to go away and find out more. The whole point, and you know this, Sarah, is good facilitation is to leave somebody wanting to carry on the journey on their own. And I think that that's been so lost in science communication because, and we've all spoken a lot about this, the way that the funding systems work for it is you normally get one shot at this. Maybe in your career to do something like this, not a year, 1 in 5 researchers get to be a part of this ever. So you want to get everything in it. You want to throw every bit of information at your audience. And that's the way often to turn them off rather than engage somebody in what do you think? Let's go on a little bit of a journey. What do you think again? And then here's how you can carry on your journey if you want to. And if you don't want to, that's fine because it's my passion project. Maybe it's not yours. I'm sure you'll engage with somebody else's. So truly unique, but what we need to get back to. And there are some nice other outputs like the Green Deals game from Vector that again have iterated in that way and they get that to come through too.
Yeah. So I think just to finish off with this, there are some really good questions that are coming through in the chat in terms of that kind of, some of the responses to the documentary. And I think this is where the documentary is just one component part in a much larger system of what is that learning that's being shared and explored, etc. But I think, Darren, just to finish with yourself, so the question that's come in from Lucy, so have we had any feedback from the people who have participated, or like some of the volunteers who participated in it? And of course, we met a lot of them. We did a pre-screening last week because we thought it only polite to show them the documentary first before it went live. And I know you were speaking to a lot of those volunteers and those participants. Did you get any feedback from them?
I think it's a little bit flippant, but I think no one's ever going to look at toothpaste quite the same way again. As Professor Harrington told us about what was actually in toothpaste. I think it was a real. They had the people that I spoke to. I knew probably around maybe five people who were part of the 100, and I had a very similar experience to them. We had our eyes opened. We really did. It's one of those things that you just don't consider how raw materials are absolutely integral to our entire way of life. And I think they all really enjoyed having that experience and then being the person who can then share that information with people. I think it's a really special thing to do.
I agree, Darren. And I think actually, sorry, there's just a really good question that's coming from Alex in the Q&A. And Alex asks, what is the biggest thing science types can learn from the film and TV industry to effectively communicate their results or information? Darren, what do you reckon? And then I'll go to Chris.
Okay, I'm going to say broader, inclusive accessibility. It's basically science content. It's got to resonate with a big, wide audience rather than specialist audiences. That's the key. It's like if your friend who's not a scientist or not in academia won't watch it, don't make it like that. Make it so the people, your neighbors, your friends are interested. Use all the skills and the tools that TV have been using for the last 50 years, 60 years. Use that to get your audience, draw them into your message and your project and get the results and communication that you want.
Brilliant. Thank you, Darren. And I think to that as well, if you are the scientist, listen to the person who has the TV brain. And even if they tell you that your thing is boring and something that you think is boring is really interesting, still listen to them because they probably have a point. That's one of my big learnings from this. Chris, what about yourself?
I was going to say leave your ego at the door, but don't let perfect get in the way of the good enough. And I think that's what Darren's saying. Don't wax lyrical about your tiny detail. Think about the big messaging, thinking about that first wave of information that will make the ripples in people's own learning. Don't try and do that all for them. It will turn them off.
Brilliant. So with that, thank you so much, Darren and Chris. Lovely to see you both. Thank you. Round of applause. Excellent. Cool. So that was us diving into the world of TV making, but also the collaboration between TV producers and the world of scientists. We're going to come back to that a little bit later. But now we're going to change direction, I think, in quite a big way. I'm looking at Owen here. I don't know, maybe you're going to speak about TV as well, Owen. But we're going to welcome Owen to our virtual platform. And Owen's going to share his slides because I have a sneaking suspicion we're going to hear about aggregates. People. Oh, yes. See, Darren, we managed to get some rocks in there pretty damn quickly with regards to this. So everybody, please put your hands together for the fantastic Owen McGrath, who's going to be speaking about responsible aggregates. Owen, take it away.
Thank you very much, Sarah. I'm hotspotting off my phone because my internet has gone down here. So hopefully it will last through the 10 or 15 minutes. I'm going to try and give a quick overview of a particular aggregate problem that we have in Ireland and that we've been addressing through a collaborative process of research. And just to start with GSI, we're the National Earth Science Knowledge Centre in Ireland. We're a line division of the government, so we are actually civil servants. We don't describe ourselves as civil servants usually. We say we're geologists, but ultimately that's what we are. Within the mineral sections within the survey, we work across critical raw materials, historic mines, and construction materials, general minerals in Ireland. And it's construction materials we're going to be talking about today, specifically defective aggregate issues. So GSI itself, if this clicks on, there we go. We are the competent national authority for aggregates within Ireland, and that legislative responsibility. It's aggregates only, it's not concrete, which you'll see is quite important when we come to defective concrete issues. And within this project that I'm going to talk about, our role is to support market surveillance authorities, who are the people who go out and ensure that the products put on the market are fit for purpose, to learn from failures, to pursue research that will prevent those failures in the future, and to provide expert geological advice. Essentially, in the same way that the Attorney General is the state's lawyer and solicitor, we are the state's geologists, and so we have to be available for other departments. Within Ireland, we've had some very unfortunate defective aggregate issues. We had some East Coast pyrite issues, which were prevalent throughout Dublin and Meath and North Wicklow. And through 2023, that has cost the Exchequer in and around 200 million through the Pyrite Board remediation schemes. Then over the past decade, we've seen what has been described as a mica problem in Donegal, and this is what we're going to talk about a little bit today. Now, I could talk about this for hours, so I'm going to try and give a quick flavor of this and then a quick discussion about how we actually collaborate through the research. And essentially, when we got brought into this project, we were looking at it and we said that to our mind and to the mind of some of our collaborators, there was a geological question over the damage mechanism. Is this actually a mica problem? The implication of that is that if we don't fully understand the damage mechanism, then that has severe implications for remediation options. So if we think we're fixing a problem and we're fixing the wrong problem, then that can exacerbate problems down the line and mean that remediation won't be as successful. The most recent estimate is that this is going to be a 3.2 billion euro problem to fix. So there are huge consequences here, both for the people who are living in homes that are crumbling, as you see the picture on the right there, and in terms of the cost to the Exchequer. And what we're trying to do is provide independent, good scientific research to review the standards which are used to determine these remediation options. So what we've done here is we've assessed specific research questions. We've liaised with our National Standards Association, the Department of Housing. We've assessed what the damage mechanisms are, feeding that into risk of retention. The Department of Housing within Ireland has spent, I've put it in as a 750,000. It's closer to €1 million over the past 2 or 3 years via GSI. And that has allowed us to put together an international research team, which spent about €500,000, and then other money for other international researchers from SK, from Petrolab, from SLR, from other universities and other collaborative surveys that we work with, like the survey in Norway. That's a picture of a conference, attendees at a conference in Quebec last year, and every one of those attendees is funded by the Irish government to do some part of their work. So it's a significant volume of work that has been funded by the government to do. And to really talk about how we do this, I think it's really valid to look back, and I've stolen this slide from a colleague of mine, Aoife Braden, so she said I could use it, so that's fine. I'm not going to pretend it's mine, but this is what people think about. They think of how research feeds into policy. We think we have research at the university, they talk to policymakers, and that goes to government. It actually looks a little bit more like this, unfortunately, where people are talking all over the shop. Some people are trying to talk directly to government. Some people are talking to regulators. Some people are talking to policymakers. Some people aren't talking to anybody of any relevance, and they wonder why their data isn't taken into account. So what we want to do is we want to generate this more structured policymaker researcher relationship where entities such as GSI can sit at the center, the nexus of this, take the data in and feed it up into policymakers. So what we had back in 2021 was we had a huge number of people doing research, little bits of research, SLR doing research directly for the Department of Housing, Ulster University talking with the Swiss Federal Labs, then talking with us, Petrolab working for NSAI, University of Laval sitting in Canada, being real experts in this area, but nobody in Ireland being aware of the work that they were doing. So what we have to do then is look at this, see how this all feeds into the European ecosystem of how the Parliament deal with it, how the Commission deal with it, how SEN deal with it as well on the European standards, and figure out a way that we can structure this better. And so to go back to what our actual structured policy researcher relationship should look like, and we put GSI into the middle of this, and this is now what we get to. And you can see here that every one of these arrows is a two-way collaborative arrow. It's really, really important that somebody takes responsibility for this collaboration, and that's what we've done in this situation. So we work with Ulster University and their consortium, which is University of Connecticut, CRT, EMPA, University of Laval. We feed data back to them, we feed samples to them, we take the results, we compare those with what we're getting from other research partners, from SLR, from Petrolab, from RSK. We work with our other survey colleagues in Norway, colleagues in Sweden, Finland, and Spain. And then we attend the conferences and see what the state of the art is. And then we act as that gatekeeper through to the policy and regulation and the legislative part of the government, where we give them the advice and the data, and they provide the funding to pursue this work. So we'll talk directly to the Department of Housing. We'll give evidence directly to select committees, joint Oireachtas committees in Ireland, similar to the select committees that you have in Westminster, and we'll work directly with National Standards Association. And it's really, really important that we make sure that everybody who's collaborating has a voice that's heard in this position, because otherwise we don't get the best set of data. So for this particular project, the research outcomes were quite simple. This is not a MICA issue. It sounds like a small little thing to say, but this has had huge knock-on effects. We see a headline here from a Donegal Daily, which is at the heart of the issue, and the headline is "Science is heeded in the latest change to defective concrete block scheme," which is, it sounds like a small throwaway headline, but that's exactly what we want to see as scientists. We want to see that the public recognize that science has a real role to play in this, and that the science comes from a collaborative process. This has changed risk profile significantly, has had some immediate implications in terms of how we standardize construction products and how we make sure that we produce good quality material going forward. And it has also led to significant changes within the defective concrete block scheme. So within 1 week of receiving the results, the Department of Housing made some small changes, which were very, very well received on the ground. And we can point to being a result of this collaborative process that we've gone through. In terms of the learnings for this, and it's really interesting to hear lots of people say some of the same things that we've come up with, and that, in terms of parking your ego, in terms of focusing on your core competency. So we always stay in your lane. It can be a very, very valuable tool as an expert to tell a stakeholder that you don't know something, because that really establishes honesty very quickly. And, they say, well, what do you think of this? I don't know. I do not have a professional opinion on that because I'm not qualified. Know what the knowledge gaps are for responsive research. And we like to divide things up into our responsive and our forecast research. So in the responsive research, you really need to see where are your knowledge gaps, what can you fill through clear research questions, such as this one. What is the damage mechanism? We focus on our competency. We make sure that everybody coming in works solely on their competency. We don't get involved in politics, and we listen to what everybody has to say. When it comes to the foresight analysis, then to go forward, we're trying to see what are the policy priorities coming down the line. Open research calls are really important here, because part of what an open research call will do is it will allow an academic or somebody in a business situation to say, well, I think there's a problem here, and that allows us to assess. So things that I don't even know is a problem. So my unknown unknowns are somebody else's known unknowns. So an academic can come to me and say, well, I think that we have a problem with this and we need to do research, and that's a problem that I'm not even aware of. So if I don't know the problem, then I can't even address a solution. And that allows us to improve a policy response resilience going forward. And none of that is possible unless we work in a team and we understand exactly what everybody contributes to it. To that end, we are hiring people at the moment. So I'll put a last little advertisement in here. Tomorrow is the deadline. It says 4 positions there on a 4-year contract. We're actually hiring 6 people. So we're looking for 2 senior geologists to work going forward on this project and to work on responsible construction materials, quality of quarried aggregates in Ireland, and all that stuff. And I'm hoping that gives us some time for questions. Is there, if anybody threw anything in there?
Brilliant. Thank you so much for that, Owen. That's absolutely fantastic. Round of applause, everybody, for the amazing Owen, as my phone rings from all directions on this end. Owen, in terms of just, I guess, building on the previous little fireside chat that we had, I'm making the grand assumption that in that network of different people that you're trying to communicate with, and get them to align on, and especially the little snippet from the media where actually people pay heed to, in terms of communicating and working with those different groups. How do you make MICA interesting to them?
Well, you put the numbers up, first of all. This is a big problem. 3 to 4 billion euros is something that gets everybody's attention. It was challenging at first because what we're doing here is we're challenging assumptions, and we're saying that the mechanism that is currently accepted as causing this damage might not be accurate. That is a challenge, and what you really have to do is be, accept that you are an expert in this, which sometimes we don't like to do as scientists. We like to kind of, hide our light under a bushel a little bit, and you have to make assertive calls at times and say, no, this is what the science says, and we're not backing down from this. We're going to keep bringing this to the table every time. So where you have a piece of data that is of that level of significance, it's important to, I think we'd say, get your ducks in a row and to say, this is what we believe. We're not saying that we're 100% right, but we're saying this is what the evidence shows at the moment. If you don't agree with this, then show us your evidence to say it's something different. And once you start to frame those narratives, and I think it becomes a little bit easier when you say, well, we're not saying you're wrong, but we're saying we've looked at it and this is what we've found. You show us your evidence and we'll compare your evidence with the evidence from our collaborators. And then if their evidence doesn't stack up, it becomes quite obvious. And that's why we talk about parking your ego, that, people say, well, if you came up with an idea and now that idea is wrong, well, that's fine. I spent time explaining to people how the mica degradation works, and it's wrong. It's completely wrong. But that was what I understood at the time, and I've changed my mind, and that's fine. And once you explain that to people and say, yeah, I did think that because I read one paper, this paper said XYZ. Somebody said, can you explain that paper to me? I explained what that paper said. And now that we've done some more research into it, I said, oh, well, that paper is actually wrong, because what we would expect to see out of that in terms of damage types of mechanisms of freeze-thaw action, we don't see that.
I think that saying that it's okay to change your mind is so powerful, especially if we're trying to move things forward. And it's a case there where that's an immensely mature thing, I guess, for people to be able to do. And in terms of those personal aspects, so here we are looking at a network of wide-ranging organizations. And I suspect that when you are trying to collaborate with all of them, there are going to be some that are easier to collaborate with others. Some of that might be down to personal reasons, or just how easy it is to get hold of somebody, or how those different organizations are resourced. How do you deal with the variation in those organizations and making sure that you are maintaining that communication and that consultation and the collaboration with the full spectrum, rather than just going, oh, well, I like working with you. Let's just go do it together.
That's a great question. I like to work with people nice. So that, yeah, one thing is you make sure that you understand what people's competencies are, and you make sure that you engage them on those competencies. In terms of, a lot of it is contract management, in terms of saying, well, we expect to see these results from you. We understand that labs can be delayed, and we understand that, that there are issues beyond people's control, but you need to explain those to us and tell us about those, and then we're fine with it. You also need to, I think from our point of view, you need to be able to speak multiple different languages, multiple different scientific languages. You need to be able to communicate with, politicians and elected politicians who, one of them gave a a really good explanation to me in a particular hearing, a government hearing, where he said, "Can you imagine we're leaving cert, so high school students, and can you pitch it at that? Because I think the intelligent non-experts is the phrase we like to use for people. So they're not stupid, but you need to be very clear about what you're explaining, particularly when you were so deeply embedded in the vagaries of concrete minerals and thaumasite and ettringite and these things that that only form in concrete and really weird esoteric minerals, and you're trying to then go and talk to somebody who is maybe a primary teacher is their profession, and they're now an elected representative, and they just want to make sure that their constituents are looked after in terms of the houses that are falling down. And having to change how you present data and how you communicate is really, really important.
Yeah, I really love that concept of intelligent non-experts. That sounds very respectful with regards to all of that. Owen, I'm sure that you're going to be able to stick around and answer more questions as they go into the chat. I know some of them were coming in on WhatsApp as we were just speaking there. But Owen, thank you so much for bringing your story into the table. And yeah, especially that concept that it is okay to change your mind. I think that's really powerful. So everyone, please put your hands together for the fantastic Owen. Excellent. Thank you very much.
You all.
That's fantastic. Great. So next up to our virtual platform is the fantastic Joel Gill. Now, Joel is speaking to us from Cardiff. He is another geoscientist. Don't worry, they're not all geoscientists this afternoon in this session. And Joel and we know one another from the wonderful world of Geology for Global Development, GFGD. But Joel always blows my mind in his ability to navigate that world of policy and everything that it takes to collaborate with a wide range of people and organizations to try and put some of that theory into practice, or at least make sure that the guidelines and the expectations are written down at some of the highest levels. So, Joel, I know you've got some slides. If you want to be clicking the buttons at the moment, once we see them, I shall shut up and listen, as we've been advised to do over the course of the next few days. And everyone, please put your hands together for the fantastic Joel Gill.
Thanks so much, Sarah. So I'm a geologist by background, although it's been a long time since I have picked up a rock as part of my research. I very much push myself to the interface between the earth and the social sciences, both in my research here at Cardiff, but also really in the work that I'm taking forward through the charity Geology for Global Development. And what I want to talk about today is really the sort of collaboration, or what we've been learning around effective collaborations in policy engagement, particularly at that intergovernmental level, and share a few reflections, maybe provocations associated with that. So just to get started, for those of you who don't know, Geology for Global Development is a registered charity here in the UK. Our focus is really on working in global south contexts, using our resources, expertise, networks to build a sustainable future for all. So in terms of the sustainable development goals, by improving, transforming understanding of access to capacity to use geoscience to deliver this suite of goals, and all that comes after it post 2013. We are an affiliated organisation of the International Union of Geological Sciences, an observer organisation to the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, and have special consultative status with the UN Economic and Social Council. So we're UK-based, but very much working internationally, and our team now has members from Kenya, Nigeria, Cameroon, the UK, Canada. We've got a wide-ranging team. Briefly, before we come to collaboration, I want to share some reflections on how we think about change and the types of change that we want to see in terms of delivering the Sustainable Development Goals. So this is a very simplistic diagram that shows how change happens. In reality, it's not linear, it's much more complex with feedback loops, pathways, multiple levels of information. But essentially, as an organisation, we're taking forward our activities to produce outputs, research outputs. So most of our work is around research that's then fed into policy and training, particularly in terms of capacity strengthening type resources. So our activities lead into outputs that then deliver some kind of capacity change, either in terms of knowledge, skills, attitudes, networks, opportunities, hopefully leading to behavior changes and then delivering impacts on the ground aligned with those sustainable development goals. And as we think about creating impact as an organization, one of the key things that we're aware of is that we can't control everything. What we do sits in this complex, dynamic ecosystem of other actors, other initiatives, other efforts, other things of work. So we have our sphere of control, we have those things that we can do, but we also have this sphere of influence and sphere of interest. And really one of the most effective ways that we've found of trying to extend our sphere of influence to give our work the best possible opportunity to create impact is to engage at that science policy interface. So I like this figure that sort of summarizes this science policy interface and a little bit of what's needed. I think within this, we already see a range of different collaborations, so those between the science community and the policy community, but also those between different players in this science for action space and how we come together to ensure that our research, our understanding of those policy needs is as rich as possible and as useful as possible. But by engaging in this space, it helps to ensure that our work is relevant to policy priorities, but also to ensure that there is this good, effective flow of knowledge between the geoscience community and decision makers. So some of the things that we've done in this space, in the intergovernmental space, we engage in things such as the UN Forum on Science, Technology and Innovation for the Sustainable Development Goals. We've engaged in things like the UN Water Summit. We regularly submit statements to the UN High-Level Political Forum, where progress on the Sustainable Development Goals is assessed and discussed by ministerial level actors. We've also engaged in COP, so this is COP26 in Glasgow, where we sent a delegation to engage in that process. So we engage both in person there, but also through our contributions to written processes, consultations, and activities that are open to people to help shape that policy process. So what I want to do now is then just pivot to think about what have we learned? What are some of our reflections around building and leveraging collaborations for engaging in this space? And the first thing is really an encouragement to be generous in connecting other people to help facilitate the starting of those collaborations. Almost all of our work in this intergovernmental space started because an individual who worked for Public Health England at the time connected us with an existing group of people who understood how to work in that space and got us involved in some early activities. And so, you know, there was no gain for that individual, for that individual's organization, but by them acting as a connector, we've been able to pick that up and take forward that stream of work and ensure that there are some geoscience voices at these large, high-level discussions around sustainable development. Similarly, by engaging in those with those existing groups, they opened up others. They were similarly generous with their connections to things like the International Science Council, so that when we were thinking about what we could do at these events, we were able to host side events, co-organised by the International Science Council, because people had been generous in connecting others to help deliver our shared goals. And that's certainly something that we've tried to then embed into our organisation. We don't always need to be the one who is there at the table doing X, Y, Z. If we think that we can bring one group together with another group for them to deliver impact that is really aligned with our values, then we'll try and make that happen. And I think that's one of the key things that I would encourage people to think about. Secondly, investing time in understanding how processes work in ways that we can join existing collaborations. So we spent a good few years preparing and achieving our consultative status with the UN Economic and Social Council, trying to navigate that to understand how we contribute to those processes. And similarly with the observer status with the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change. Understanding these UN mechanisms, understanding these processes, and understanding things like the UN major groups and how they operate and how they function and how we can play a part in that has enabled us to, I guess, to engage more rapidly, to have more rapid traction in this space by becoming part of something bigger rather than trying to seek to have an independent voice on our own in these spaces where, you know, as a relatively small organization, we would be easily lost. So really understanding these ecosystems and how we fit in has helped us to ensure that our voice is embedded into the statements that are delivered at these intergovernmental forums. I think that leads to the third thing around the nature of building effective contributions within the types of forums that we have there. So at many of these forums, we found that the best and most kind of impactful way that we can contribute is by embedding our ideas and our thoughts and our perspectives about the value of geoscience into statements that other people are making. So as much as we think that geoscience is incredibly important, actually there's a whole set of other things that are important as well. So in statements that were delivered about sustainable cities, for example, we worked to get a few sentences in there about the importance of the subsurface, alongside lots of other stuff around sustainability in cities. And actually, I think that is more important and more helpful to get those messages picked up because it's an interdisciplinary message for an interdisciplinary challenge. The same with the importance of education for sustainable development. So we delivered a statement at the UN Science and Technology Forum in 2019 where we talked a bit about the importance of Earth systems being part of that, but it was wrapped into this bigger statement around education for sustainable development. But I think it helps to get traction by bringing our ideas together with others to give a more rounded, balanced statements that was, you know, that wasn't just about trying to advance one particular group's objectives. And then the fourth thing, I think, particularly for those listening who are in this academic space or maybe have opportunities to feed into continuing professional development courses or training, there are specific skills that I think that are needed for building effective collaborations, for monitoring the health of those partnerships, also for engaging at the science policy interface. And I think we want to really work with students. We want to work with those who are going on to careers in this space to ensure that they have the skills to do that and to take these things forward effectively. So I think, you know, we've been learning as we go, but what we're seeking to do now is to take our learning and how to engage in these spaces and bring it into open access learning resources so that students, as they're coming out of their geoscience courses, that's our natural grouping of people that we work with, are coming out with a wider range of social soft skills so that they can think about the types of partnership, the types of collaboration that they need to develop, how to monitor the health of those partnerships, how to strengthen them, and how to then leverage that to engage at the science policy interface. And it would be great to see others continue to do that and build that into the opportunities that they have when working with students. So there's some of the reflections that I have from our engagement at that intergovernmental level, but also happy to answer any questions that people have.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Joel. As always, absolutely fantastic. Round of applause, everybody, for the fantastic Joel Gill. Joel, you were alluding towards the end there, having some open source materials to help people develop, expand, improve their engagement, so that science policy engagement. Do they exist yet? When can we expect them? How can we help?
Yeah, we have an open access module on geoscience and sustainable development, which is a set of 8 classes with a core reading and then some different activities, so questions that people can reflect on their own, activities that they can do in small groups. And it's really been designed so that those who have opportunities to help create, shape, deliver learning experiences can take it and use it in whatever way is most appropriate for them. So it could be that they run it as a module, it could be that they take one of those classes and they embed it into an existing university module. It could be just that they're inspired by one of the activities that we suggest and they run that within something that they already do. So that covers a range of different things, such as working in the global south. It brings in skills around science diplomacy, science policy, stakeholder mapping, understanding things like the social, economic context of a situation and how that might affect projects that we run. So that would be one kind of resource that is already in effect. And then things that we're working on at the moment, particularly through this year as the organisation, is a resource that essentially helps people to navigate the UN system and understand where geoscience sits in that space, how people can contribute, and how people can engage in that. Often, you know, it might be, there are ways as an individual to contribute. There are open calls for evidence to be submitted, case studies to be submitted. But it might also be through ways in which people partner with those of us who have the status within the system, or it might be around collaborating with professional societies, the Geological Society, for example, of London, who also have, you know, ways of engaging and bringing together the voices of many people into those spaces.
And with that, Joel, I'm assuming that these kind of guidelines, etc., will also include almost the kind of outline of the etiquettes in terms of engaging with this. And speaking from a personal perspective, it is quite scary and intimidating when you're like, I want to get involved. I have no idea either how to do it or which toes there are to be stepped on as well. And actually knowing where to begin with regards to that can be quite tough.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we definitely we were thrown in the deep end. So when we went to our first Science Technology Forum, the pace at which things moved, you know, we were live writing our statement to be delivered up to seconds before we were called upon to deliver that, running around the room, trying to get certain, you know, emphasis on the geoscience into that statement. But I think, you know, from partnering with others, and again, it comes back to the generosity of other people who have been in this space for a while, who've shared their experience, who've shared their connections. I think we've developed a little bit of an understanding of how to structure those statements that are submitted, how to write those, ways in which, you know, I think although certain events anybody can request to speak, ways in which to increase the likelihood that you are given, you know, some opportunity to speak, and that can often be by, you know, stepping back and saying, well, I won't be the person to speak, but I will work to get my ideas and my core arguments into the statement that another group is delivering. And again, kind of recognizing that, you know, within collaboration, sometimes there's a need for us to step back and let other people really take the lead, but to support them from the side, I guess.
And I guess with that as well, just being acutely aware that there's often many kind of layers of things that are going on within that room or within that forum that when you first walk into it, you might not see, because it's not just somebody standing up giving a presentation or conducting a panel session. There's all kinds of stuff that's going on behind the scenes.
Absolutely, and all kinds of stuff that's gone on in the months and months before. Yeah. So a lot of what's going to make it into the kind of the published report, I guess, that comes out of the Science, Technology and Innovation Forum has probably already been decided upon and agreed in the months and months of preceding, whether it's regional platforms that happen in Europe and Sub-Saharan Africa and South America, or whether it's by other kind of more focused conferences and events that happen that feed into that. So I think really kind of understanding, again, it goes back to that kind of understanding of the processes, understanding of the ecosystem in which you sit, how one thing leads to another thing and leads to another thing, and finding as many different ways to submit ideas, share resources. I think one of the points I made was about kind of keeping things very simple, evidence and solution orientated. So, you know, for some of the things that we've been doing, it's not been about taking, you know, very specific latest research about, you know, a specific thing. It's about trying to get the value of the subsurface, something as simple as that, kind of embedded into this statement so that it can be picked up and then reflected on in more detail at a later stage. But I think kind of finding ways to bring those simple evidence solution orientated kind of comments, sentences into as many different reports as possible can then help to try and drive a bigger conversation.
Absolutely, Joel. And I guess it's similar to what maybe Chris was saying at the beginning of today's session of, actually what's the really important stuff, kind of put, the things that you've done the bulk of your research on or whatever to one side and focus in on the really important essence that needs to come through.
Definitely. Yeah.
Yeah. One final question, Joel, if I may, and this is inspired by on Tuesday we had Kumbada speaking to us from Namibia, and she was talking about how so often she is on the receiving end of collaborations from the Western world, as it were. Now, this is something where GFGD works a lot with people from different countries, etc. Do you have any suggestions as to how to make sure that collaboration isn't the UK doing it to somebody in Namibia and instead creating that much more equal partnership or putting Namibia at the leadership position of the partnership?
Yeah, I mean, I think often the resources for these partnerships are sat in, for example, in the UK, we've got UK Research Innovation, for research funding. But I think kind of there's still, even the resources sit here, there is still understanding of what may be a priority in that country will sit in, whatever's coming out of, say, for example, Namibia in terms of, what are the reports? What's the strategic development plan of the government? What's the kind of the commentary that's coming out of that space to ensure that, research is really addressing priorities or projects are addressing priorities in that space. And then really, I think building those initial collaborations as early as possible. So trying to ensure that co-design process is really genuinely co-design where partners in, you're not going with a pre-prepared plan of we want to do X, Y, Z. Does this sound okay to you? But coming and thinking, what could we do collectively, maybe leveraging resources from the UK or elsewhere to deliver on something that has been identified as being a priority in this country in this particular context. And I think that can be challenging. I think it can be challenging because of our funding structures here in the UK, where we might not find out until for fairly late in the day what a particular priority is going to be, tight deadlines and such like. But I really think the earlier those conversations can happen, the better. And maybe there's a space for groups like UNESCO to help facilitate those kinds of collaborations, ongoing chats about potential future partnerships or research projects, and to be ready for when funding does come up elsewhere.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for that, Joel. As always, really brilliant to see you. Everyone, please put your hands together for the wonderful Joel Gill. Thank you very much. Excellent. So we've been talking about rocks, we've been talking about geoscience, we've been talking about policy. Well, now we're going to go into the wonderful world of agriculture. And to welcome to our virtual platform, please put your hands together for the fantastic Helen Glass and also Selena, who is going to conduct a bit of a fireside chat. Over to you, Helen and Selena.
Hi, Helen. It's so
Hi.
wonderful to have you with us. Thanks so much for joining. You are a kindred spirit from the world of agriculture, which, as you and I have said on a number of occasions, actually has many similarities with mining. And let's not forget, provides us with many critical raw materials, including our food. For background for everyone on the call, Helen and I met, actually, I was thinking, it's only about 7 or 8 months ago. Yeah, so not very long. On a call arranged by actually a mutual colleague to discuss Satala's Farm Balance project. But in my experience, even in that short time, Helen is a fantastic introducer, very thoughtful introductions. And actually, Joel, I really like your terminology around generous in making connections. That's exactly what Helen is, in my experience, and building partnerships where the whole is far greater than the sum of its parts. So luckily, Helen, this is a key part of your role at Scotland Agricultural Organisation Society, or SAOS, as we'll probably call it now on in, supporting farmer co-ops and driving innovation across that network. So it'd be really fantastic if you could introduce yourself and SAOS in more detail, and then we shall dive into some questions.
That's great. And thank you so much for inviting me to speak at your conference. And I guess listening to the previous speakers and the introduction, there's a common language around collaboration across the different sectors. So that's been great. But yes, SAOS, we've been around for 120 years supporting the agricultural sector in Scotland, and collaboration, cooperation has been and continues to be at the heart of everything that we do. Now, we're constituted as a cooperative, effectively a federal cooperative, because we're owned by around 60 farming cooperatives, predominantly operating in Scotland across agriculture, aquaculture and forestry. And that really gives us a sense of scale in terms of agriculture. But uniquely and innovatively, over the last 15 years, SAOS has set up 3 additional subsidiary businesses who share the same governance and the ethos that we have at SAOS. We have approximately 60 employees across these business units. And our membership gives some staggering statistics about agriculture and farming. We have access to around 24,000 farmers, representing around a third of Scotland food and drink sector, and they have a collective turnover of around 1.5 billion. You know, these really gives us scale, and our overarching objective is to make our co-ops more sustainable and resilient in the future. And we do that in 4 different ways, including providing governance, which is really important, supporting them to become more competitive and profitable with new business opportunities, and key is protecting them from emerging threats. And all of these requires collaboration and partnership working to achieve that. Now, I joined SAOS about 7 years ago and have responsibility for creating and developing partnerships. And somebody said earlier, it's actually a privilege to be in the type of role that I have, because I'm often working cross-sector that will deliver the benefits to our co-op members and the farming sector. And I lead on supply chain innovation activities at SAOS. And one of the things that just to finish off to say what it is I do, we launched the Cultivating Collaboration Network, which is our platform for engaging with other sectors, nurturing partnerships, engaging with academic innovation centres and innovation excellence, and promoting farmers to take part in art research and development projects. All of that together is about bringing new thinking to farming challenges.
And it's incredible. I've been so impressed with the network, and we know, farmers are quite a disaggregated group, and bringing everyone together, particularly around new innovations as well, is quite something. So yeah, very cool. So your business is really collaboration, but where has collaboration taken you by surprise, for example? Where has it worked when you least expected it to, and why?
Yeah. That has to be about working cross-sectorally, whether it's with the downstream space sector, the green hydrogen technology sector, and the life science sector in terms of the opportunities for our agri co-ops. So that at the very start of that journey, I wasn't sure how that would work, and that really did take me by surprise. But as ever, it's the unexpected conversation at a networking event or in a webinar. Already I've got some ideas from this webinar, but need to catch up with Joel on that. But also, where I came from in past experience is about when businesses who may be competitors, they share a common challenge or a part of a supply chain, they will collaborate around a particular challenge or a theme. And I think that was surprising at the start of my journey.
And sort of drawing on that, actually, because you've mentioned to me that collaboration is now being valued very much alongside technology and innovation. For example, in funding for research and certainly delivery projects on the ground. Why now, do you think? Is that or is that a recent thing? And if it is, why now?
So I think the value of it, we did 2 things at SAOS, and the first barrier that we had was about perception of co-ops to be R&D type partners. And we had to work very closely with the funding bodies that co-ops were a legitimate and eligible partner in collaborative projects, and that we had to explain what the co-op model was and how accessing a co-op what that can give a partner, scale, but also access to the supply chain as well. And the second thing that we had to do was to break the mold, and the previous speakers spoke about this, was about co-innovation, co-design with a co-op partner. That was really important. But why is it important now is I think that when we look at the future farming scenarios, it's a very different landscape and skill sets that are emerging to enable these farm businesses to grow and become resilient. Digital world, earth observation, artificial intelligence, and the ability to use data. And we've spoken a lot about data already this afternoon. And that's really important because it's working with cross-sectorally on these technology areas. What we don't know, somebody else does know. And I also think it's really important now about the impact or the commercial relevance is not just about a single farm, it's about a catchment scale opportunity as well in agriculture. So I think that's why linking that now with alongside technology and innovation, that's really important to bring about change, as somebody else also spoke about, bringing about change.
And you guys are the trusted partners, really, that your co-ops turn to, right? Because there's been a lot of tech that's been designed for farmers, but without farmers' inputs in the past that has gone nowhere. So perhaps there's a recognition, I'm hoping there's a recognition of that in the mix as well.
Absolutely, because that trust is so important. And you said at the very start, using trusted intermediaries to access different sectors like Earth observation, space sector. So yeah, and I think what we also have is SCOS as a unique and compelling proposition around agriculture about for farmers, but by farmers, for farmers, and the ownership, say for instance, the ownership of farmer data belongs to the farmer, and how can the farmer be rewarded for that? So yeah, I think building trust, maintaining trust is so important to not just our co-op members, but to the partners that we work with.
Definitely. So one more question from me, and then I'll hand over to Sarah to see what's happening in the chat. In your experience, when do collaborations unravel? Perhaps there's no common answer to that, but perhaps there's an example you could give, and why?
Yeah. So I guess one of the ways to answer that question is to turn it on its head. That if you have through collaboration, you're having many threads, and you want to weave them into a cloth. Now, if these threads unravel, the whole cloth just disappears. But a success, in terms of if successful collaborations are based on trust, collaboration breaks down simply when trust is eroded and broken. Now, that might be unaligned expectations or even shifted priorities, even if they're unintended. If the share of the pie shifts unilaterally, that's also a key area. Poor project management, and that's something that we are really keen to improve upon in across our business, is project management, that personal relationship with the different partners. And I'd say the final thing is partnerships that haven't been grown but pushed together. I was at a webinar yesterday, and there was a fabulous comment made by one of the speakers, and it was around public sector funding. And they said, don't meet up for the first time at the first quarterly review meeting, because we can spot that. You build a collaboration and a partnership, you nurture it and you grow it, because others can tell if you've been forced together.
Helen, that's awesome. That's been a theme actually right the way through the conference this week. So thank you so much. Sarah, over to you for any other questions.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, both Helen and Selina, for a really, really fascinating discussion. And I think in terms of learning from that world of agriculture, but then also that world of mining, there's so many synergies there, aren't there, Helen? I mean, it's amazing. And I think the learnings between the two sectors are fascinating. But one question I wanted to ask you, and that's about the collaboration up and down the supply chain. So in terms of the world of farmers, and especially through co-ops, you mentioned that through a co-op and through SEOS, for example, you've got that scale. And so therefore you've almost got a bit more power, perhaps, or kind of influence within that room. And so often, be it in the world of minerals and metals or in the world of food, for example, the people with the least power in the room are the farmers, and they're the ones that get squeezed between the uncertainty of, say, the weather and having to produce something. So where's that collaboration up and down that supply chain? Do you want to say anything more to that?
Yeah, you're absolutely correct. And our role is very much about working across the supply chain, and working with collaborative partners across that. But what the position that we're currently in is the value of the risk has to be shared, because at the moment farmers when it comes to innovation, take all the risk but are not rewarded for it. So looking at this is where it links into policy, legislation, regulatory aspects. How can the value, take an example, farmers and data. Farmer collect that data, whether that's around natural capital, or that's probably quite a good example, is how do they get rewarded for that through the supply chain to the retailer? How is that of value to the financial institutions that may be working with that farmer as well, and using that, monetizing that data and that value for the farmer, because otherwise they're taking all the risk and very little of the rewards. They're constantly being squeezed. And that takes a mindset across the supply chain and the drivers, particularly with the retailers as well. It's a complex landscape. It's not simple when it comes to something, say, like biodiversity, natural capital. But it's going, I think the next 5 years are going to be really exciting in terms of how do we shift mindsets for the benefit of the farming sector.
And Helen, in terms of working with all those farmers, and this is based off Owen's question in the chat, where he's asking, so he's saying, so from his perspective, they deal with relatively large organizations, but of course, farmers, you've got lots and lots of maybe either sole traders or individuals or very small organizations that are working. So have you got any hints or tips? How do you work with this massive array of lots of little companies opposed to one or two big organizations?
So that's where, in terms of how we position co-op, so it could even be farmer associations, it could be, a collection of farmers. They don't have to be incorporated as a co-op, but that collection is so important because some of our co-ops have 10 farmer members, others have 6,000. Now, interestingly enough, the one that has the 12 farmers are in receipt now of over £1.5 million from Innovate UK R&D, because as a 12, it's easier to corral 12 farmers around farming from trials and demonstrations, as it might be if the numbers grow stronger. And it's about somebody you mentioned at the very start, the connectors, the people like at SEOS, the trusted connectors, the technology translators, the good program managers, being able to liaise with a collection of farmers that have a commonality, and that might be a supply chain. Say in terms of the barley supply chain for distilling, so they and I think that's important that they have a common supply chain, because if you improve at farm level, then you can see the commercial and market opportunities of anything that you change through practices or innovation.
And with that, in terms of that, so again, that alignment around that kind of common goal, or the commonality between the people who are coming together. Just going back to your comment about the risk rewards. And I think, this is it. I'm here on our family farm in Scotland, and, it's beautiful outside right now. The crops are growing in the field, which is amazing, because this time last year it was too wet to even get into the fields to sow the barley. This year, the crops have gone into the ground nicely on time. But of course, what is my dad, the main farmer, grumbling about today is the fact that we haven't had any rain and we need rain. But this is part of that risk reward. And going back to something that Joel mentioned earlier, there are some things you can control, but then there's some things you can't. And so often those farmers are trying to deal with risks that just can't be controlled because it's the weather. And yet, in terms of that reward, there's no additional reward on the table for taking that risk. Is there anything there around the collaborations in terms of that risk reward equation that can be dealt with?
So absolutely. So, what are the methods or the approaches to take where, there's a buy-in from further down up the value chain in terms of that shared risk and reward? How do we look at, and this is really difficult, there's very few examples where we can probably touch on it at the moment, is how do we have the mechanisms in place? And this is where prediction technologies come in, and AI, weather, because weather is one of the key, issues. And as we go into climate change as well, we're going to take on more and more risk. Now, can you mitigate risk through predicting it? Can you think about when it's risks around food security as well? Are you going to take the risk to grow slightly different varieties of crops because based on prediction? So how does the financial institutions and also the retailers as well, if they're going to have to share that risk in order to give to have the food on the shelves for their consumers? So it's risk management is so difficult and it's complex. So this is where bringing on thinking from what do other sectors and other supply chains do, because that's the value of bringing in the new thinking to any of the challenges that we have in agriculture.
Absolutely. No, and I think that's a case here where, from a personal perspective, having grown up in the mining sector, but having really grown up on a farm, actually seeing all of these learnings coming back into the world of agriculture has been absolutely fantastic over the last wee while. So final question, just in the chat before we move on. So Ralph has pasted into the chat, how do you begin to have a conversation with a group or supply chain that's entirely fragmented, especially if farmers are averse to the idea? How do you reconcile their existing perspectives, and what's that unifying voice or message?
Wow, that's a great question. We'd have to either find it or ask you to repeat it. But is Ralph asking about the farmers, their innovation, farmer-led innovation, or have I not picked up?
I think there are a number of aspects in there.
Yeah.
Perhaps the most poignant bit within there is, how do you work with farmers who are averse to the idea of working together? So they want to do their own thing. Maybe it's the way they've always done it, but actually there's massive value if they're working together in a group.
Right. So I'll just give you just one example of that is demonstration. The ability of farmers to look over the hedge and see something's being done differently, and that farmer has got a new market opportunity or diversity opportunity by actually farm demonstration is so important to change minds. And they're so inquiring. If you have, we have days where we go farm demonstration locations, being able to say farmers will come and see and ask questions, etc., because they're very competitive and they pick up a good idea as well, but they're also willing to share. And I think that's a very important way to bring people together, is demonstrating a solution that there's something in it for all of them, but with market demand, because that's really important. At the end of the day, what's the market opportunity if I change my way or change my tractor or diversify? Where is the market opportunity, and how do I get a slice of that pie?
Yeah, absolutely. So make sure the economics are there, not just the reason for doing it being a good reason. Brilliant. So with that, thank you so much, Helen and Selina.
Thank you.
Fantastic discussion. Really, really lovely to see you both. Round of applause, everyone, for Helen and Selina. Excellent. Next up, everybody, we have the fantastic Madhu, who's going to take us back to the worlds of rocks, I suspect. But again, coming at this from a slightly different angle. You see, there's a theme here. Everybody comes at this world of collaboration from a different background, bringing that diversity of thought to the table. Madhu, if you have any slides, now is a good opportunity to start clicking them. And Madhu, as you will see here, is speaking to us from the other end of the country. So down, I suspect you're down in Cornwall at the moment. There we go. Excellent. But you're part of a collaboration that involves universities from across the world. But without further ado, please put your hands together for the fantastic Madhu. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Sarah. Can everyone hear me all right? Perfect. So as Sarah mentioned at the start of this session, I have been lurking all through this conference, and I've been able to listen to different presentations. And when I first started my PhD, this was one of the first conferences I got to attend. And it was like this 101 into the world of geology and ways of thinking about it. So it's quite lovely to come back to this space, but also listening to all the other speakers on collaboration here, I was just getting in some of the themes around the what of collaboration, collaborating between the global north and global south, upstream and downstream supply chains, between the social and natural sciences, and so on and so forth. But also the sort of the hows of collaboration, the ingredients like great trust and curiosity and being able to step back and listen. My talk is going to be slightly different because the question here is, what is missing from collaboration right now? We are seeing so much collaboration to a point where there is, in some spheres, collaboration fatigue. And what if we put all the collaborations that's happening in the world right now, what is the additive impact of that? And kind of bringing in a systems perspective. And I think the big question for me is, why are we seeing so much collaboration, but there is still a sense that the needle is not being fully shifted amidst some of our great global sustainability crises? So before I properly start, let me introduce myself. I'm Madhu. I'm, as Sarah meant, between two universities, University of Queensland and Exeter, the Camborne School of Mines, which is where I'm currently based now. I'm Singaporean, and I have 10 years of sustainability background at an organization called Forum for the Future, where I was working in our Southeast Asia office. And a lot of my experience and expertise was in building sustainability at the heart of business strategy rather than as corporate social responsibility, as well as in building multi-stakeholder collaboration. And this is what I was doing professionally for a long time, but then I took a step back and started learning about resource crises and inequalities, and started working a lot towards land justice, specifically looking at sand in Southeast Asia, because my country, Singapore, is the world's largest importer of sand. And I'll tell you more about sand as an example in thinking about collaboration. And all of that somehow, starting from political science, moving into sustainability, and then sociology, got me into the world of geology. And that's been quite an interesting move. But I think the main thing to bring in is I am all of these things. And if I had to distill this into why this is interesting or important in thinking about collaboration, I'll talk about one thing, which is I think what I am is a social earth scientist. And there is something here which is about not just the social sciences. We've talked a lot about the differences between natural science and social science. And the thing here is about actually, there is something unique as someone who's coming in from an outside in perspective of the world of mining and geology. There is something about the social sciences that's critical. People have said it. But at the same time, if that experience of building relationship is not anchored in the realities of the geology, as I think Kyle on Tuesday talked about it, the immovable objects or the controlling factor, then actually there is something that's quite not very robust in that collaboration. So that is the thing here, is there is something about a hybridization of these disciplines that feels necessary here. And I'll explore a little bit about that over the next 10 minutes or so. So my slide's not moving. Okay. The main thing, oh, now it's moving too quickly. Okay, here we go. The the main thing is we're all different, looking at an elephant from different points of view. So if I'm standing in front of an elephant, I go, well, I think that's a sphere, but actually it's the nose of the elephant. So there is something that within where we sit in the system, we have different vantage points. And there is something about if we want to think and work as a system, there is actually value. There is no one person who can see the full elephant. If anyone says that, they are lying. But if we work together, we're able to piece together and understand that actually what we're looking at is not a sphere or a tree, but we're actually looking at an elephant. And there is something here of being able to see that elephant requires stakeholder engagement and robust engagement. And sometimes, particularly having been in the world of mining for the last year or so, I see a lot of talk around so stakeholder engagement as a form of social license to operate. But I don't think that's what it is. I think that is not the outcome. The outcome is to build and unlock completely different future possibilities, because we are in a sector that is a bit broken. Actually, we can say that about many sectors, but specifically with extractive industries, there is something about we need to rethink certain things, and our stakeholders can really help us with that. And I'm going to unpack this. All of that sounds a bit abstract and quite out there. I'm going to unpack this with my story and what I'm closest to, which is sand and ore sand, and why I think systemic action and meaningful stakeholder engagement matters there. So what is sand? Sand is one of the world's most extracted materials in the world. It's the most extracted solid aggregate material because it goes into, as Ewan talked about, with aggregates and concrete, but it also goes into various other supply chains. It goes into glass, it goes into ceramics, it goes into the silicon chips that go into our phones. So pretty much everything we touch in the urban and some parts of the rural world has sand in it. Most of us just don't think about it. And the reality of it, especially from my perspective, is the reason why its impacts of extraction is so big is that we often extract it within industry as a commodity, but what it really is a life world. Its extraction has quite deleterious impacts when it comes to the ecosystems, the hydrological functions. A lot of dredging in certain parts of the Mekong in a Southeast Asian river system can completely flood some parts of the system and then create droughts in other parts of the system. And at the same time, it can also create destabilize riverbanks and ocean areas such that people are massively displaced. The reality is because it's not visible, a lot of people don't think about it, and a lot of these very in situ impacts get deprioritized or seen as too far away, out of sight, out of mind. And because it's a newer topic, a lot of people don't understand, we don't even understand the causal linkages of these impacts fully yet. So there is something about that which makes it really interesting to study and understand and build kind of collaboration around, because we have a lot of imperfect information. But at the same time, as someone who's worked in sustainability for over a decade now, I'm thinking about sand within the much wider context of our climate crisis. We are at a particular time where the decisions we make about the world will have dire consequences of what kind of future we will experience. And sand sits quite squarely within it, just by the sheer virtue of its current extraction. But if you see the sort of second diagram here, there is something quite big about if we look at the future demand for materials as a whole. Sand, gravel, and crushed rock are a really big part of that. And you see that the huge big blue band of demand increase over the next 30 years that's expected, a lot of that sits within sand and mineral resources. So then there's a question of, we are in a critical window of time with a really big problem, and we can't afford to have incremental or piecemeal innovations, because there is something quite big at stake here. And within the futures, the world of futures that I've operated in, there is this big question. We have no visibility in data. We have a very serious challenge. And then the problem is only going to get worse as we demand more and more materials. How do we act amongst all of this uncertainty? And the sort of futures kind of talk that we have is that actually, if everything was certain, the action would be quite straightforward. We will know exactly what we need to do. But when there is uncertainty, there is the need to navigate. And because we are all at the different parts of the elephant, we are all navigating based on imperfect or very specific forms of information. And I think there's something about the sand problem within the climate and biodiversity and all wider sustainability crises we are having, in that we need to navigate together, and collaboration is critical here, because if not, we can't afford that. So kind of thinking about this big problem and then thinking about what is commensurate action here. We have lots of tiny different forms of research and innovation. What is actually going to shift the needle? And there is a question. We don't have a question, but my project looks specifically at one material, which is considered to be a potential technical alternative, and not a substitute. And that is ore sand. So ore sand, you're looking at the middle river sand, which is where a lot of the extractive impacts lie. And a lot of countries are moving towards manufactured sand, which is crushing rock. So even though you don't have the same ecological impacts, you're still crushing rock and you're creating quite a lot of mechanical additional impacts and the carbon emissions of it. And ore sand is basically a material that is about a co-product from metal mining. So we're here in Cornwall with Cornish Lithium, studying their processes to then understand what is ore sand co-production from lithium. But you can do it with many other forms of materials as well. And the kind of key thing here is that this is a material that is not necessarily recovering waste, but actually stopping the production of waste in the first place by rethinking about what is valuable from the beginning. And the kind of commensurate element here is in terms of the quantity, in that if we are taking things from the natural environment in terms of oceans and rivers, there is an opportunity here instead that there is this massive amount of material that's being created into tailings. And is there a possibility that instead of having tailings that fail with huge issues, is there a possibility of reducing that while also creating a sand resource from what can be quite meaningful as a material? And this started as a collaborative project in the first place, in that one of my hosts, my other institution, the University of Queensland, has been working with Vale to co-produce ore sand from iron ore in Brazil. And now the question is, they've made a proof of concept for one host lithology, which is iron ore. And if we can move this towards lithium and copper and other materials that are critical for our energy transition, is there a sort of not killing two birds in one stone, but actually planting two seeds at the same time? So there is something about that as there's a possibility there. My project here is actually going, this is already potentially quite meaningful as a technical innovation, but we know that every technical innovation that is put in with the best intent and best hopes can reproduce lots of existing sustainability challenges, particularly in the social arena. So the question for me is, there is an opportunity for something here that could be quite big. How can we embed it in a way that's sustainable, or thinking holistically about sustainability from the beginning? So thinking about it from the context of Cornwall right now, having done some stakeholder engagements, it's interesting. There are lots of interesting enablers already present, in that tailing storage is expensive, tailings fail, there is increasing scrutiny around sand resources, there is a shift towards new ways of thinking about sand. But at the same time, despite the global discourse and global sort of opportunities opening up, we're also seeing some big barriers at a local level. And we know that for something like sand, even though it's a global challenge, the efficacy of the intervention depends on the local mineralogical context, on whether something can work. And we have some critical barriers here in Cornwall that are not just related to the material, but also in terms of questions about safety standards, something that Owen talked about in terms of pyrite, but also like questions like, might there be the concerns around that? But also in terms of things like there's not much specification of financing for secondary raw materials, things like questions of, are there primary material lobbies blocking innovation around circularity? and also lots of competitiveness. If we bring in this material, are we out competing local markets and other quarries? And does that mean that we're creating livelihood challenges for other actors? So there is something about working within the market that creates, we realize that we are quite stuck. If we want to work within the current paradigm, the paradigm is actually, the power dynamic is we want to reinforce the existing structure, and it's very hard to move. So what if we move outside the market towards how the community is thinking about it and what kinds of questions they bring? We know that from a Cornish context, as a mining place, there are lots of significant environmental legacies in Cornwall. So there is something about if you introduce a new material or a material that the community is not familiar with, are you reproducing some of those environmental legacies, or are we doing something to be able to tackle legacy issues like acid mine drainage or other things? So that's one question about, for ORSAN to be a systemic intervention, it needs to do these things. The other thing is, who gets to have a say of how this land is used? Is it just these companies? And of course, for a place where we know that lots of places with great resources suffer from the resource curse, in that they don't get the benefits of the resource extraction. It goes downstream in the value chain. So there is a question of, well, who gets to see the distribution of these resources, and how does the community co-benefit from it? Again, a criterion for how we design this intervention for it to be meaningful. And again, and one last thing, which is around, is this a rich person's technology? Does this only work in global north countries, when actually this is a massive systemic global challenge, and we need something like this to work across contexts? It needs to be affordable. And does this outprice countries that are in the current sand market but can't afford to go into an alternative? So to me, being able to think about the market is critical, because that's where practical intervention happens. And then the community and its concerns are even more critical in terms of making any intervention resilient. And I think this is where ecological and social justice are not just outcomes to prevent or to attain social license to operate, but actually they are pathway towards a creative mineral co-production paradigm that builds in justice as part of the future that we want. But even then, one of the questions that I often think about and wonder about is what's missing. Even often in collaborative spaces, we tend to silo people into, this is an industry person, this is a community person, this person is in the periphery of the power dynamic. But systems change, and sometimes systems are stuck. And I do think the current sand system is stuck in different ways. And as systems change, understanding how they change and what kind of leadership roles are needed, not just for the immediate business paradigm or the community concerns, but about unlocking a new future and unlocking a new paradigm can look like, is the question. And this is a framework called Panarchy, which looks at how systems move and change. And part of it is that all systems evolve. They when you have a very kind of well-known established system, we are conserving that system. It's established, you've got, the dynamics works really well. But when it dies, when it begins to not work as well, when it's having cracks at the bottom, it's releasing into a new system. It's like when a vase breaks down, you have little glass pieces, and those glass pieces are being reorganized and reconstituted. Or to Helen's thing of looking at agriculture, when we are looking at a tree that falls, it actually decomposes and mulches to give the soil the compost it needs in order to be able to birth a new forest. So it's the same thing here about systems and systems change, of actually where are we in the system so that we can intervene meaningfully to usher in the kind of change that we want to see and work with people's appetites. And the thing about it is, depending on where the system is, there are different kinds of roles that are needed. And for me, there is something about, people often get pigeonholed into certain roles because of where they sit. If I'm an industry actor, I'm meant to be the thinking only about my short-term returns and being able to prove my business case. And if I'm a community actor, I get really angry when something bad happens. But how can I contribute to something so that I can see something really meaningful that is not just preventative or kind of retroactive justice. So there is something here about what are the roles needed depending on where in the system we sit. And I think my big question here is very much around, if ORSAND is about disruption and activating new collaboration, how can that really work and how can that be meaningful? I will basically close with what I think is commensurate stakeholder engagement given the scale of the challenge. And I think there is something, given the kind of nature of my presentation, something about working with insiders who know how a system works and constructive questioners who are asking meaningful, interesting questions to pick at it and strengthen the thinking. But often where we are stuck at is the activators and the pathfinders who are actually helping us think about entirely new imaginaries. These are usually unusual suspects who are sitting at the periphery of a system or might not even think about something. I worked in the world of NGOs. Mining would have been entirely unthinkable for me at least 3 years ago. So there is something about how do we draw in people who are often not part of that collaboration, what's missing in that collaboration, and instilling or kind of building their role up, or people who already exist in that system but don't see their roles as pathfinders or activators. How do we usher that in? I think is a critical question. I think there is, for a pathfinder, there is something about repatterning the system and rethinking that. For a constructive questioner, there is something about engaging and co-designing towards interventions that are holistic. But critically for the insiders, it's leveraging on their knowledge as well as their expertise within how a current system works, because they have had that for years usually. And in order for all the silos within the knowledge within each of these groups to be able to talk to each other, this is why we need the facilitators who enable and build the sort of multi-stakeholder collaboration. And again, as I said, there is something here about geology and social sciences that requires some level of syncretization of disciplines, I think, which is quite critical. But yeah, I think that's where I am. Thank you so much for your listening, and keen to hear what you think.
Fantastic. Thank you very, very much, Madhu. And I've been scribbling away, stealing all your diagrams. Don't worry, I will reference you with all of that. And I love where you were finishing there in terms of how do you get those insiders, the constructive questionnaires, and the activists and the pathfinders to work together, especially when the activists and the pathfinders don't know that they are activists and pathfinders, and so have to be found. So we're going to come to you during the panel session anyway. I'd just like to, well, firstly, give you another round of applause. So thank you very, very much, because that was absolutely fantastic. Our final session of today, before we go into that final panel session, is with the phenomenal Priscilla Nelson and the equally as phenomenal Monica Ospina. Now, many of you who have been with us all week will remember that we've been talking about this podcast called Mining Dialogues. And for those of you who have already gone in and listened to some of it, yes, everybody, we've brought you Priscilla and Monica, i.e. 2 of the 4 stars of the show. And it gives me great pleasure to welcome both of them to the stage to talk about not only the collaboration with regards to the podcast, but I think some pearls of wisdom in general. So please put your hands together for the wonderful Priscilla and Monica. Thank you very much.
Yay, yay. Hi. Are those slides okay?
Yep, they're perfect.
That's great. So I'm Priscilla Nelson. I'm a social earth scientist and engineer. So I am really confused about most things, but I'm also very brave. And I was very excited to meet and become friends and colleagues with Monica Ospina, my partner. Monica, introduce yourself.
Well, hello, everybody. Really nice to meet you. I'm Monica Ospina. I have been working on the social side of mining for almost 20 years, doing boots on the ground, mosquito bites, as we always describe it, like the experience of social scientists is really measuring mosquito bites and dealing with the frustration of many communities, and at the same time building bridges, which I think is the value that we can bring on the table. And this story with Priscilla is precisely one that starts off collaboration and very much looking to find a solution. So Well, let me tell you a story because Priscilla was a little bit shy of starting, but this comes from this amazing woman. And I had the privilege to guest lecture at the Colorado School of Mines on a stakeholder engagement. And we started conversations back in 2022, and we were saying, well, this is like friends sitting in a dining table. And that's Priscilla's analogy on that. So that's why we invited dining table here. And that concept has been part of our story and how we are visioning this, and is how we can do collaboration and how we can explore conversations that are not comfortable, and from issues that are sincere interest to learn from each other. So basically, Priscilla comes from the very scientist academic background. I'm come from the mosquito bite social common ground. We will say there is nothing in common here. But when we start asking, next is Priscilla. So we were talking about how did mining ended up here? That was the question we want to answer. So why so bad when it's so much fun? Why is it so bad when the minerals are we are the first part in the supply chain of all industries worldwide? Why so bad if agriculture and mining are just the basic to sustain humanity? So Priscilla and I, we sit in our dining table and we start talking about that since 2022. And to be honest with you, one thing that was amazing, and when we talk about collaboration, is that we didn't have any form of shape of how this will end. But we were clear that we want to have friends around the table to share their views, to share ideas, and to find solution on how we ended up here, how we can move over. So that's when Mining Dialogues start. Next, Priscilla. And after we invite two friends to the dining table, Glenn and Luke, and this is how the first series of the podcast started. I think that back 2022, we never thought this will be a podcast, seriously. We were just thinking, and that's why the dining table is there. We always thinking that we'll be friends around the dining table. And when we invite Glenn and Luke, I had the fortune to know Glenn for quite a few years, and happens that they know each other, and happens that they have shared stories. And Priscilla, I stop here because this is the part that was fascinating when you start interacting with them, and we start all together putting our heads together. And let's talk about how we collaborate at that.
So I think it was fantastic. Monica and I were bound and determined to have the conversations that were not being had. And we needed to find the voices that needed to be heard and pose it in the correct way. Many conversations from 2022 through 2023 with people all over the world. And I had first conversation with Glenn, and he just started doing a brain dump on me. And I said, you're talking about things I don't know about the mining industry, because he's been in it since 1950s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, 2000s. And he had this perspective, which was integrating over time to how did we get to where we are now? And he put me on to Luke. And I had met Luke before, but he also gave a brain dump on me. And the two of them had worked together over that long period of time. And it occurred to Monica and me that this story of the evolution of how did we get to where we are now regarding mining and the perspective of the world about mining, which generally is negative. How did we get here? And so we invited Glenn and Luke to start talking, and it evolved as it evolved. We started a first podcast, and then we had a second one, and then a third, and then a fourth, and then a fifth, sort of chronologically building this concept of from mining in the 1950s, which was really not very environmentally wise, not responsive very much to the social aspects and the environmental aspects, through the establishment of the Environmental Protection Agency and everything going on in the 70s and the 80s and the 90s. A lot of things were learned, and a lot of these things have been forgotten. So we made the commitment for the podcasts to tell the story that includes the things that everyone who is now in the mining industry, who was not in the mining industry even 10 years ago, could understand what has been learned and what does not have to be relearned. Very exciting, and it was also very interesting these days with the strange politics of the United States that Luke and I are both from the United States, Glenn and Monica are both from Canada, and we figured out how to collaborate without engaging in politics.
And no tariffs, eh? But Priscilla, well, there are a couple of things that I think that I would love to add here. When we start navigating, and that's why we landed in this title, From Trouble to Transformation, when we start navigating history, we learn that the history of mining is very easy to judge and be very harsh using today's lens of human rights, today's lens of transparency, today's lens of how finance is working, the new generations, the interest on social justice and all of this from today. We're coming from an industry that is very old. We're coming from an industry that most of the time the government has fully control. And that is the deals that happen between the mining and the governments. And most of the time was private door deals. So that's where we're coming from. And democracy was not all around the world back in the 50s. It has been a phenomenon in the last 100 years. And this is when we started discovering how social science marry with geopolitics, and mining obviously is how it materializes, which I think that is the very interesting piece. When communities start getting a voice in those countries that were authoritarian regimes and so on, it reshapes the nature of the relationship we had. So we need to be clear in one thing that is very interesting is that mining has accompanied humanity in every step of development, social, political, philosophical, and it is shaping. And right now we see a participatory process because we see communities having a voice, because those countries become democracies, because social media have access to transparency and communicate. So all of this has reshaped that, and that's why we see the transformation today. I think that is very, very critical. And the conversation between Glenn and Luke was all the time kind of revealing many pieces, no? That's why the conversation was not ending. And Priscilla has to be the hard one saying, no, sorry, guys. This is gonna be a forever conversation. We need to close the series. Go, Priscilla.
Yeah, I said we had to cut them off sometimes, I must say. But I learned a lot, and reflecting back to one of the speakers in the second session, Sarah, the concept of the amygdala setting in, and I could feel my amygdala setting in when I didn't think I was being heard, or in other people when they didn't think they were being heard, and you could see this concept of whether it's micro meditation or micro mediation coming in. I learned a lot during this process. And what I finally did when Sarah asked me and Monica to come to this conference was I threw all of the transcripts of all of the podcasts into ChatGPT.
Our assistant.
And I said, what collaborations have been identified that are needed, that we need to understand exactly how to focus on each one of them. And so these are the 10 top collaboration areas that ChatGPT identified, slightly modified for the words that we wanted. And they are, it's a framework that actually allows you to say, if I'm going to deal with that collaboration, who needs to be at the table? And what does the conversation need to be? And so we're embarking on future mining dialogues that can address some of these collaboration needs by bringing in people who have been involved in each one of them, and then building a framework of understanding the nature of that collaboration and how it needs to be developed. Monica, go for it.
Well, this is interesting because this is very much from obviously, Glenn and Luke come a lot from the social and development side, but this has to bring a little bit of pepper and salt from the science perspective. because all of them are linked. So, for example, when we talk about legacy of mines and closure, we are talking a lot about tailings, and we're talking a lot about economics too. And so when we talk about water stewardship, we talk about environment, water management, and health and safety, community engagement, planning. So when we were talking with Priscilla about our assistant ChatGPT throwing us this 10, we learned that our assistant forgot to give us that all of them are a lot of parts of many tables. So Priscilla, I think we're going to have a restaurant by then. So all of these tables are basically topics that cannot move forward without collaboration. It's impossible. You cannot move equality and inclusive just by having a group of HR committed DIY people. It's not going to happen. That's it. So all of these things are, once again, a call of collaboration and inspiration for us to explore how we bring to the table exactly what you, Sarah, are doing with the conference. You're bringing a lot of different perspectives. You set the table for all of us. A lot combination of that science background and expertise, and ours is just a casual conversation on a specific topic. But basically, it is a big conclusion for us when we started. Priscilla, remember we were looking very serious about donuts economics. That was back 2022. We're like, this is it. And after when we peeled the onion, we learned, no, this is not only this. This is more behind this. So it is what we envision, that the more we learn, the more we find that the industry needs to talk among themselves, and beyond talking, landing on practical solutions, I think.
Right. And I made a last slide that Monica hasn't seen yet. Because the discussion, to me, the discussion, it has to be collaborative inside of mining companies themselves.
Exactly.
And that's one of the major problems. We need them to understand themselves as an integrated entity. So we're dealing with cross-disciplinary, cross-functional competency and capacity building inside of the mining companies. And this includes, I just brainstormed 10 because 10 was the number, the geometallurgy and the integrated mine planning, the material flow through the mine has to be understood by everyone involved. We really have to think about, many cases, people think that new technology is going to be disruptive. Well, if we really understand the entire flow, we can make the positive disruptions. And that needs collaboration all along the pathway. We need closure strategies that are integrated across the entire process and across time. And that brings up the big sick idea of time. Monica and I early identified the differences in time perspective between the mining companies and all the other stakeholders as being one of the major issues in actual having communication. But in fact, inside of the mining company, trying to get closure strategies considered rationally when the mining processing people are trying to think about tomorrow. The closure strategy is thinking about 50 years. There's a disjunct there, and we have to figure out how to have that collaborative discussion. And then it extends to industrial ecology. We have mining companies that are secretive. They don't want to share information. If we're ever going to think about mine waste as not waste, and I don't use that word anymore, but as unused resource, then we have to understand what that unused resource is and share knowledge about it so that we can find ways to use this unused resource. And you can come back to water and energy stewardship. A lot of that is done by outsourced subs for a mining company because the mining company doesn't want to deal with it. Well, they have to reintegrate responsibility the entire way in a way that they haven't done. But the next 5 years, even as Helen mentioned, 5 years, the next 5 years can be a period of tremendous integration inside of mining. And if that could happen, that's going to make them better collaborators with the stakeholders and the regulators and the population at large outside. And all of this thinking about ESG has become a bee in the bonnet of mining. They're just reporting out the craziness of what they're doing. And we've lost the linkage between ESG and the SDGs. And that has to be reestablished and a real collaborative internally in the mining company before we can actually engage with it externally. So that's a brain dump just saying that we need different scales of collaboration before we're prepared to have a global collaboration relating to natural resource use.
And one thing, Priscilla, just to add, because that inside mining companies, I think that one of the challenges that we don't take into consideration is that mining is a universal industry. Mining is not a bank that is sitting in financial district in New York City or London, or you can locate it in certain areas, or it's not a maquila that you can have Bangladesh and you choose the locations, or ports that you choose locations. We are worldwide operations. So when you will have worldwide operation, having cross-disciplinary and internal collaboration is very challenging. It's very, very difficult because you put into that cake layers of not only the time difference, which is already some people are very tired when they join meetings and the other ones are super fresh when they start, is the culture. And well, we adopt English as a common language, which is already a big progress. But at the same time, is the perception of responsibility is very different. Some countries still, the country wants to have a very important role in the permitting or regulation process. Let's say Canada is very active on observing the processes. Other countries, their countries and legislation is not even existent. So building that inside cross-functional competency, as you say here, is acknowledging that we want to integrate the machine, not because we want it, it's because it's needed. And that's exactly what you're just saying. In all of these elements is very much needed that we see this as a risk, not having done it, and we act as an organized action plan for collaboration. Otherwise, it's not gonna. We're gonna go backwards because we are too big. We cover too many territories, and that is another issue for collaboration. It's possible though.
And I think, but risk is the language that's being adopted internally in mining, in understanding the framework, and bringing that risk framework out to the global risk of not doing collaboration is extremely exciting. And I think it's a framework that may allow the stakeholders and the perceptors to say, yeah, I'm going to invest in this conversation. So there you go.
Brilliant. That was absolutely fantastic, Priscilla and Monica. Big round of applause to both of you. Absolutely. Thank you for that. And thank you for finishing on the wonderful world of risk, because we get to speak about that quite a lot. Just two very quick questions for you before I then bring in the rest of the panel, and then we can round off not only today, but the entirety of the conference. The first question has come in through the Q&A from Janet. And Janet's asking, and I guess, Monica, this is really leaning into what you were saying just then about that post-mining landscape. So how do we hold mining companies accountable in view of the research into the impacts of that kind of post-mining on the socioeconomic lives of people? And I know, Monica, that you didn't hear what Helen was saying about the agriculture world, but it's almost a case here of that land itself, of course, continues through time. So do you have anything there about well, I mean, I guess in direct response to Janet's question, but then also thinking about that collaboration with different people, different land users, different opportunities with regards to that land as well?
Well, I thank you, Janice, for your question. And sorry, Helen, I miss agriculture. Agriculture is a key partner if we want to see it on a positive way. It's a partner in this puzzle. Number one, land. Everything around the conflict of mining goes around land access. And that conflict between the rights on the surface and the rights on underground. And that is a conflict between countries and land occupants. Forget about if they hold rights or not. So it is approaches. Yes, it is a lot of approaches just by simply acknowledging that we are going to use the surface of the land for 10, 20, 30, 40 years, depends on the land, the life of the mine, but at the same time acknowledging that the land is not going to disappear. Yeah, it might be a hole on the ground, obviously, if we're going to make a hole on the ground, but the environment where the land is not going to disappear. It's going to be reshaped. And one thing that I find important in the engagement process that we don't do is to make communities aware of the changes. And sometimes agreements go that no, relinquishment is everything going to be fine. Well, no, you have a hole on the ground, or you have a tunnel on the ground, or you will have a shape environment that how you can bring your traditional practices to here. Can agriculture be a partner? I think agriculture, sadly, we put it out of the discussion, and should be part of the discussion because it's part of the livelihoods of communities in those areas. So the closure starts from the mines opens, and that's one of the challenges in mining. We think that closure starts 5 years before. No, it starts from the first time you just really decided that you're going to build a mine. And that is when agriculture should come in place. I have the opportunity of working with projects that we start working on precisely agriculture as a second income for their families, because agriculture, contrary to mining takes time to find the mineral resource. Agriculture takes time to develop the crop. So the concept of timing is also quite critical for both industries, but you need the time that the mine will give to small farmers. Or I have many cases that employees were small farmers and their family taking care, and we just give incentives for them to invest the money in their own farm, and probably the company matching a little bit, so the incentive is there because it will take the time for being a good source of income. When the mine closes, is going to be ready. So it is critical. And the other piece on companies rarely think about is investing on the land rights. In many parts of the world, indigenous peoples, they don't hold the legal rights. They hold the rights given by Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. And some regions and some companies are very conscious and respect the fact of being occupants. Some others not. So that is part of the social investing. What is legalized that? Because you want a fair deal, no? You want a clear agreement that, yes, I'm dealing with the owner of the land and we can sign agreements together. So it is avenues, Janice. Thank you very much for your question. And
well,
Helen,
I think that
Priscilla.
the basic sense of the closure strategies evolve. It's a framework that can work, but it needs to go from exploration through the juniors, through the majors, with continuity of stakeholder engagement. And you hear more talk about co-design with the mining companies. That there's resistance to that concept, but I think as we have so many mines that are looking towards closing facilities in the next 5 to 10 years, where we have not closed very many, I think the framework of closure is extremely important right now, because that's going to, if we can have effective co-design and satisfaction, we're going to reestablish trust in the long term, which is what mining companies don't do so well.
Yeah. And Priscilla, let's think and let's add on something. Closure not only happens with the mineral resources over. Closure in a mini form happens when the price drops, and it's a slow and down operation. So it's a mini crisis. So it's so cute. So when we see those prices drop, we see a slow down in the production, sometimes even stop fully. And that is a closure moment, because communities feel their livelihoods fully impacted, no? When they are fully dependent on that. I think closure should walk at the same time that exploration walks. But you tell that to a junior, it will just be very upset, because do I drill or do I invest on this? And the investors will looking more for drill hold results than community acceptance. So it is very, very challenging, because the core of our industry is undersourced. And Sarah, I'm sure you have heard this a lot.
Yeah, no, absolutely brilliant. Thank you so much to both of you. I've absolutely loved listening to the podcast. I know that, to be honest, if Glenn and Luke had their own way, they would still be speaking now. And so I think actually the true magic is Priscilla, like, congratulations in getting them to stop talking for a while.
Not very happy. None of us, I include myself, we were not very happy with that.
But I think as well, with regards to this, really looking forward to the next set of series, plural, with regards to the dinner party that you are facilitating. And Rose and I have been quietly speaking behind the scenes. And despite the fact that Rose currently has Stevie on her lap, who I guess technically speaking probably wouldn't be allowed into our pub, but we've decided that Responsible Raw Materials is probably more of a pub than a dinner party. I don't know.
I mean, to be honest, Sarah, and at the same time, look at the quality of your pub. Your pub has beers and good friends together, and at the back you have open dialogue sitting in a dining table, because we were very lucky and very fortunate that you support our idea. So thank you for that, seriously. So your pub has a dining, so it's fantastic.
There we go. So if you want to come along to, just even if it's just a quick drink, or if you want to come and sit and have some high quality dining experience, you know where to come. So just to say thank you very much to Monica and Priscilla. Please, everyone, give them a round of applause. Absolutely fantastic. And we're going to finish off today's session, and of course, indeed, finish off the entire conference with opening up this final discussion to our panel who have stuck around with us. And I'm just going to work my way around our virtual pub or room, whatever we want to envisage it as being for the moment, and just ask you, what are some of your key takeaways from the discussions that we've heard over the last few hours? I think, Madhu, if I start with yourself, because I also know that you've been listening into a lot of the rest of the conference as well. And so just maybe some of those aha moments or things that really resonated with you. And then I'll go to Owen. And for our lovely attendees, so be you listening in on YouTube or here in Zoom or via any other medium, if you've got any final thoughts that you'd like to share, please do feel free to put them into the chat or whatever mode of communication you would like. So Madhu, if we come to you first, and then we'll go to Owen.
Thanks, Sarah. It's been really lovely listening to people think about collaboration from very different perspectives. This has been a conference that's been quite geo-heavy, so it was really nice to hear Helen think about food systems, because I come from outside. And actually, as Lucy mentioned in the chat, when I first started working within the mining and geology sector, I was like, so much of what I'm learning about palm oil in Southeast Asia, it's almost the same. We're just learning slightly different things. And I think even across the different topics, as people are talking about whether it's zinc or whether it's something else, we're seeing so many commonalities and common learnings from this. I think it's less of an observation because there's too much. My brain is still kind of buzzing with too many things. But a question that I sort of leave with this conference is about actually, what does this mean practically in terms of that additive collaborative impact? And I don't know how many of the people in this setup feel this sort of collaboration fatigue, but in my previous job, that was something that was felt all the time. And someone else brought up this thing about resources, how we collaborate all the time, but it's not properly resourced. And then actually that is the critical sort of bit that is necessary for meaningful action to happen from that collaboration and for that glue within the collaboration to continue. So I think there is something about that of how can this be well resourced and to what end? How can we work towards a sort of systemic impact in all these collaborative tissues working together as a whole body? So I think that's kind of what I'm leaving this conference with.
So that's brilliant. Thank you very much for that, Madhu. And I agree. It's very easy to fall into that collaboration fatigue world because it's hard. It's really hard and tiring often to get those collaborations to really work. Especially, I think sometimes if some people aren't necessarily coming to that collaboration table in the easiest way. So how do you gently kind of cajole them to come along on that pathway with you? Owen, how about yourself? And then let's bring in Helen.
Well,
get your perspective.
as somebody who spent last weekend cleaning out a slatted house after cattle had been there for the winter, I love the farming analogies. There seem to be a lot of farmers here. And it's something I actually would like to kind of pose a question, which I guess maybe Monica and Priscilla might be best able to answer, that with the sort of comparison of mining to, and to farming, and the question that Ralph asked and Madhu answered really well on on the quarrying and aggregate extraction seems to get less of a kind of a bad rap, and where that dissonance comes from. I'd really be interested in Priscilla and Monica's observations on how visibility of an industry affects its acceptability. And I mean, we see in Ireland, 30-40% of our watercourses are in poor to bad condition. That's not a result of mining. That's primarily an agricultural result. But it's not, we don't have a backlash against agriculture, aside from, legitimate questions about specific practices. But yet, we would have a huge backlash against certain types of mining activity. And then in an area where we have had mines which closed, 10 years ago, and the mine is being planned to reopen, that mine planning permission process and has zero objections because there is visibility in that area of what mining brings and the positive nature. And I'd be really interested. I mean, I wonder at some time, are we making very legitimate, good scientific arguments for why, for about tailings management, about how mining won't be polluting, but do we need to just improve visibility more so? That's what I kind of take away from that. Yeah. And I'd love to hear people's take on it.
Well, we had this conversation about the different perceptions of agriculture and mining as two industries. And I think that the general feel is that they both have environmental impacts and social impacts that are to a certain extent forgiven more often of agriculture than they are of mining. So the basic sense becomes, to me, the pretense maybe fact that mining is inherently more understandably sustainable, and its goal has to be sustainability of the land and production of food. Mining has never had the goal of sustainable. And because it wants to just get in there, get the stuff and get out, it's inherently not sustainable. And by limiting its thought to just that life of mind, rather than thinking longer term on the continuity of the region, they're never going to be looked at as a contributor to sustainability. But they can if they expand their sense of responsibility to extend from before the mine operations happen and extend to after. This concept of a continuum of sustainability that mining is contributing to. It's not taking away from.
I think that sounds absolutely amazing, Priscilla. That expanding that sense of responsibility and accountability is so core. Monica, do you have anything to add before we go across?
Yes, I take it, obviously, Priscilla comes from one angle, I come from another. But let's start from the general perception. And I mean, I have said this 1,000 times, but let's be honest. I mean, we are an ugly industry. We don't look nice. Seriously, we are a hole on the ground, and we are lots of dirt and that, and the tracks are not sexy. So is really we are not good looking industry. When you have agriculture is all green, pretty, and with the background of a blue sky is great, but when you see slave labor and child labor, and you see illegal migration ill-treated, and that's not in the picture, because it's so green and so pretty. And it's a lot happening in agriculture that honestly is a very, very dark side. And at least in the legal mining, we don't have that side, no? At least we don't have that extreme child labor abuses and slave labor like that. But that piece are not captured. And one thing that adds on the complexity of the sustainability of mining, when Priscilla was saying, is that calls for, once again, collaboration and long-term planning. And that's the piece that we don't have. And we have in conflict with governments, because in the democratic system, we have people elected for a very short period of time, 4 years, 5 years, or 3 years, depends on the jurisdiction. And that planning doesn't match the planning for mining. Our minds go for planning 30, 40, 50, 100 years. So you will see in the lifetime of a mine, you will have 10 different governments coming through with 10 different approaches and a very short-term thinking that is very difficult to commit and to gain social acceptance at the political level when you have to meet the 10 times different expectations of politicians representing our people. So on one hand, we are not good looking, so sadly we have to deal with that. One of the things, and it's a just funny anecdote, if you notice in the trade shows, Caterpillar and all of these guys, they try to put these sexy girls going up and down in the tracks, but it doesn't help much beyond that. Because in reality, it's not like that. But we have that, and we have the conflict with governments for lack of planning for long term. And that together are very difficult to make it work, unless governments are committed to think for the next 30, 40 years, which sadly are authoritarian regimes because they want to last in government for 40 years. And in our system, we don't want to see a president for 40 years. And well, Mr. Trump is trying, but we don't want to see that. But mine that needs that long term. So that is a huge challenge that goes along that sustainability of mining.
Great. Thank you very, very much for that, Monica. And thank you as well to all of you who are putting things into the chat, into the comments. The discussion is absolutely fantastic. Helen, thoughts from yourself? And then I'm going to bring in Darren again, who I know has come back for the panel session, just for any kind of final thoughts from yourself, Darren. But Helen, what about you?
And as if by magic, the links to our videos have just appeared in the chat. Delighted if Darren had a view of them and give me his thoughts on how slick and convincing they are. But please do take the time to look at them. What do I want to say? Wow, this has been an amazing afternoon. And I think the commonalities around collaboration approaches, I didn't think I would see that. And it's there. I think that needs to be the momentum around that is something that we can take forward. Risk sharing and unlocking the value associated with that risk. Commonalities there. I'd love to explore that further, as I would love to look at the supply chain collaboration between mining and with food and agriculture. So, you know, these were resonating with me. I thought the speakers fabulous. I've taken so many notes. I didn't think I was going. I thought I was going to be out my deck listening to all things about mining and aggregates. And oh, wow. Finally, I'd love to get the link to the Monica and Priscilla's podcast, but maybe the final thing is I'd like to say I can see having a new podcast as a result of this afternoon, because so many things we could reflect on around that virtual dining table. Because whenever you bring food and drink together, you get good collaboration. So that's my key thoughts from this afternoon. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Helen. It's been an absolute pleasure having you with us as well, because as you say, the that cross-pollination, all puns intended there, between that world of agriculture and mining, there's so much synergy there and so much learning, I think, as well. But on that note, Darren, over to the world of TV and production. Any final thoughts from you?
I think, yeah, I mean, there's a massive hunger for knowledge in the science and, you know, geopolitical audiences. I mean, I think last year the BBC Science had about 170 million hours, that's million hours of content relating to science being consumed. You know, 35 million people watched a science program on the BBC last year. That's half the UK population, roughly. There is an audience there. So when it comes to collaboration, I think it's joint. In our case study of our documentary, science met TV, and it worked beautifully. We had a great result. But I think on a bigger scale, it's a collaboration between sectors. It's between mining, media, science, communications, brands, platforms. Everyone needs to collaborate and respect each other, I think, to get the results what people are striving for. And for example, TV is a huge audience, and it's a classic aspirational platform to put content on. However, in the UK, around I think it's about 80% of Gen Z and Gen Alpha kids to you and me get their content from YouTube, and that's only going to increase. So I think it's the way you create and craft your story, but also always remember who your audience is, where you want to take those messages for. I think that's really important. I think the ultimate aim is to empower audiences with the knowledge and information, the skills to go out, make decisions for themselves and take action where necessary.
Absolutely, Darren. And just on that subject of YouTube, so I've just gone and checked on it now. So the documentary that was launched at 1 o'clock today is now up to 289 views with 34 thumbs up. Way. But of course, if people don't like it, please tell us as well, because actually, I think conflict actually resulting in collaboration and change. There was a real learning from that came through the course of the conference that we've been listening to and taking part in over the last few days. So I think with regards to that, and Helen, I'm loving the fact that your dog has now made an appearance. Absolutely fantastic. This is a platform. In this pub, everybody is welcome, as we've already seen, including, I hope you all noticed, Stevie, who made an appearance a little bit earlier. So the reason why Rose wasn't here at last year's conference was because Stevie was very, very, very little. And we did dedicate last year's conference to Stevie. So it was wonderful to see that she made an appearance. Apparently she maybe has chicken pox today. Hopefully she isn't feeling too dreadful with regards to all of that. But with regards to this year's conference, of course, we've been talking about collaboration, and I think that collaboration very much is at the heart of responsible raw materials. It's all about us trying to provide that safe space, or perhaps that dinner party table, or whatever it might be. Maybe it's a fire pit around which we are gathered to have those conversations, to feel courageous enough to actually say where we maybe don't understand something, exactly as Owen was saying, or perhaps say, that's interesting. I maybe have a different thought or feeling with regards to that, or maybe go, I love what you're doing. How can I get involved? How can I help expand all of that beautiful stuff that you're doing in your universe? How can I then help spread the word and make sure it has a much bigger change perhaps in the world round about us? Over the course of the last couple of days, we have been joined by 29 presenters from around the world. So we've had people speaking from 15 different countries. Priscilla, I know that you were using ChatGPT to really help with regards to sharing the word and to collate together some of those wonderful points of learning, perhaps from Glenn and from Luke. I also used ChatGPT purely to try and get to draw a map of the world, to basically depict those 15 countries that people had come from. And I can safely say that, it gave me two options of the maps. I think as human beings, there is still a place for us on this planet, because I don't know about you, but I don't think ChatGPT's knowledge of geography is all of that good. I'm slightly concerned with regards to where it thinks certain countries in the world are. Maybe world leaders are using ChatGPT a little bit too much. I don't know, because actually this might explain some of the geopolitical policy, for example, that is going on in the world right now. Anyway, once I saw what ChatGPT spat out to me with regards to maps of the world, I then stopped using it to try and collate together the final thoughts for today's conference and also what we heard over the last few days. I should say there is a massive place in this world for artificial intelligence and machine learning, but maybe not yet with regards to drawing maps. It's got a little way to go in terms of learning there, or it's just learning from some very strange people who coloured in maps in a different way to me. So what have we learnt over the last few days? Well, we've learnt that collaboration obviously is core to actually allowing us to put together some massive areas of change that we need, perhaps in the world round about us. We've learned that each one of us is almost programmed or naturally brings a different set of skills to the table. And perhaps people who are coming more from that natural sciences perspective love to talk about data, love to talk about how can we get that data into a form that it can be shared, etc. And if we're not careful, we'll go down that rabbit hole of delight, which at the same time, somebody who comes from maybe social sciences or a legal background or the arts, they couldn't care less about those data sets. They really don't care about them, and actually instead would prefer to talk about things in a different format or in a different way. So how do we come to the table with the so what? What are those messages that are really, really important? How do we bring those to the table with a level of empathy so that somebody else can then learn from them, build on them, and do something with them? But at the same time, when we are coming to that dinner party table, or perhaps that negotiation table or mediation table or fire pit, actually doing our homework on those other people who are sitting around that table and having that respect for, well, what are they bringing? And actually, when I'm having that conversation, every single one of us is a facilitator. So it's actually down to every single one of us to think, well, hang on a second, the conversation is now talking about agriculture. I might call on Helen, because I think that Helen maybe knows a little bit more about agriculture than some of the other people sitting around the table. So again, being aware of one another's strengths, being aware of one another's experience as well. And so providing that space in the conversation for people to almost show off a little bit about, well, yeah, I can talk about that. And that therefore helping with that collaboration. We've spoken a lot about different hints and tips as to how to get that collaboration to work within groups. Of course, trust, respect, listening to one another, absolutely key. Also as well, the freedom for people to do things in slightly different ways. So how do we help point people in the same direction, but still give them the freedom to walk their own paths? As Helen was saying, one farmer will look over the fence at the next door farmer's field and go, all right, actually, that seems to be working. I might try that. But also as well, with regards to that, when the farmers are all speaking to one another, no one actually believes the yields that one another says they're getting off their fields. So there's an element here of seeing is believing, rather than just listening to the general chatter that's going on within that landscape. So I think as well, tapping into that culture is really, really important to then understand, okay, how do we leverage and how do we create some of those collaborations? And then finally, just to finish off with a lot of what's going on in the chat as well at the moment, is having that immense respect and also, again, understanding about ourselves that, okay, we all come from certain backgrounds and certain cultures. And depending on where in the world, perhaps collaborations or real benefit can be seen, how do we make sure that we put those cultures, those people right in the center of those collaborations, rather than just saying, hello, I've got an answer, I'm going to now come and do it to you? How instead do we think a bit more imaginatively about creating those collaborations, those systems, those networks, so the right people really do have the voice around that table? And so where we are pushing forwards decisions, collaborations, change, that change is for the positive good of the people who actually are having to live with it, rather than those of us who perhaps were around it and just pat ourselves on the back and say, hey, that was a good collaboration. Look at all of that wonderful impact we had. It's the people that have to live with it who should therefore be able to say, well, no, actually, that was the right thing to do. And I can see the benefit that it brought to our lives. So there's a huge amount more, and I'm sure that ChatGPT would do a much better job than I've just done in terms of trying to summarize however many hours of content we've just had. Please do feel free, go back to the website. All of the recordings are going to be up there probably as of tomorrow morning, because Helen and the team behind the scenes who are doing all the editing, you are true legends as always. It's amazing that we can pull this out of the gate so quickly. Joss and Aileen and Rose, as always, true legends, being able to put all of this together. Absolutely amazing. Of course, the unwritten principle behind responsible raw materials is keep it simple. Rose and I, we get involved in a lot of different conferences, and it's amazing when people say, right, we have a conference in 2 years' time and we need to form the committee and we need all of this stuff. And Rose and I quietly look at one another and go, do you? Do you really? Or can you just keep it simple and go for it? So Responsible Raw Materials, it's a not-for-profit. We do this on a voluntary basis, but actually being really selfish about it. Wow, do we learn a lot? Every year when we do this, we learn so much. And it is a true pleasure being able to work with so many of you and pull together these conversations or help facilitate these conversations. I think final words, I'm looking at Rose, if there's anything else that you would like to say as the co-founder of Responsible Raw Materials before we wrap up. Any final words of wisdom, Rose?
Well, I think, Sarah, the final thank you really does have to be to you, because you do such a fantastic job at facilitating this conference. None of us know how you do it and keep the energy. Poor Joss and Aileen and me are just there dying behind the scenes, and you just keep a level of energy that we can only aspire to. So thank you for being such a wonderful host and facilitator. Because without that, I don't think we would be able to have the conversations that we have in this space. I think it's a really special space that we have that's very open and that allows collaboration to happen. And yeah, just a massive thank you to you as well as the rest of the team, because it's fantastic. And obviously a huge thank you to all of our speakers as well for another fantastic year.
Brilliant. Thank you very, very much for that, Rose. So with that, everybody, it's still on the cusp of 6 o'clock UK time. Let's finish on time. And for those of you who'd like to continue the discussion, get involved via the website, or we can put our email addresses, etc., into the chat. This is all about open communication and dialogue. Listen to the Mining Dialogues podcast. Listen to the next set of podcasts that are going to be coming. Helen, I'm in the process of trying to persuade my dad to do Tales from the Tractor. I'd find it interesting. I don't know if anybody else would find it interesting listening to my dad and I have a conversation. But anyway, it'll be an interesting podcast for one or two people. But anyway, watch this space. Thank you very much to everybody for